Cleaner discovers scam in $1 million Arabic contract, and what her boss does. Margaret Thompson was pushing the cleaning cart down the quiet hallway when she heard excited voices coming from the main conference room. It was almost 7 in the evening, and she still had 3 floors to clean before heading home. At 52, her back hurt more each day, but the job paid the bills and kept her mind occupied, away from the memories she'd rather forget. As she entered the conference room, she saw stacks of documents scattered across the huge dark wood table, papers in Portuguese, English, and something that made her heart race. While arranging used cups and wiping coffee stains from the table, her eyes landed on a specific document. The Arabic handwriting was unmistakable, fluid and elegant, dancing across the page. Margaret felt a chill down her spine. How long had it been since she'd seen that writing? 15 years? 16. She knew she shouldn't, but her hands trembled as she picked up the document. The words began to make sense slowly, as if she were dusting off a forgotten part of her brain. Total property transfer, 24-month deadline, automatic reversion clauses. The document said something completely different from what the Portuguese translation next to it indicated. "What are you doing?" Margaret nearly dropped the paper. She turned and saw Jason, the director's assistant, standing in the doorway with a suspicious look. "Sorry, Mr. Jason, I was just organizing the papers that were out of order." "You can read Arabic now?" he asked with a sarcastic smile. "I studied it a long time ago." "Sure." Jason rolled his eyes. "Finish the cleaning and get out. Dr. Richard doesn't like it when the cleaning staff takes too long." Margaret lowered her head and continued her work, but those Arabic words wouldn't leave her mind. She knew all too well the consequences of ignoring danger signs. Her life had changed drastically because of just that. The next day, Margaret arrived at work early. She needed to speak with Dr. Richard before he signed that contract. Anderson Industries was a medium-sized family business that manufactured components for agricultural machinery. Richard Anderson had inherited the business from his father 5 years ago and was desperate to expand. Everyone in the building knew it. She waited in the hallway on the 10th floor, where the director's office was. Her grey uniform with white details was impeccable, her hair pulled back in a low bun. Margaret had always taken care with her appearance, even when life had taken everything from her. When Richard stepped out of the elevator, she approached with trembling legs. "Dr. Richard, may I speak with you for a moment?" He stopped and looked at her in surprise. Richard Anderson was 38, with neatly trimmed dark hair and wearing thin-framed glasses. His navy blue suit was impeccable, as was his air of superiority. "Margaret, right? From cleaning?" "Yes, sir. I need to talk about those papers I saw yesterday in the conference room." "Papers?" He took off his glasses and wiped the lenses with a handkerchief. "You shouldn't be reading company documents. I know, Doctor, but I happened to see them and noticed something strange. The Arabic document, it says different things from the translation." Richard put his glasses back on and stared at her with an expression Margaret knew well. It was the look people gave when they thought you were crazy or lying. "You read Arabic?" "Yes, sir. I studied for many years." "A cleaner who reads Arabic." He let out a short laugh. "Look, Margaret, I have a professional translator handling this. Samir Al-Najjar has worked with international contracts for years. I think he knows what he's doing. But, Doctor, I just wanted to warn you that—" "Margaret," his voice grew firmer, "I appreciate your concern, but you're overstepping your boundaries. Return to your work, please." She felt her face flush with shame, but insisted, "You're about to lose your company." Richard stopped in the middle of the hallway. He turned slowly and stared at her with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Lose my company? Do you have any idea what you're saying? The contract isn't what it seems, sir. The clauses in Arabic are different. You're going to transfer everything, not just part of the profits." "Enough." He raised his hand. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this ends now. Go back to your department before I call the supervisor." Margaret watched Richard enter his office and slam the door. She stood there feeling that familiar mix of frustration and helplessness. It was as if time hadn't passed, as if she were still that woman no one listened to, no one believed. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Margaret cleaned bathrooms, emptied trash cans, wiped down tables. But her mind was elsewhere, trying to find a way to make Richard listen. She knew that investor was pulling a classic scam. She had seen things like that before, in another life. When she got home that night, her small apartment in the Park Slope neighborhood seemed even more cramped. It was a simple place, but clean and organized. Margaret always kept things in order. It was the only thing she still had control over. She heated up the meal prep she had made on Sunday and sat at the kitchen table. As she ate, her eyes landed on the old photograph hanging on the wall. A younger woman, smiling, with a diploma in her hands. She barely recognized herself in that person. Margaret had been a university language professor. She spoke Arabic, French, English, and Spanish fluently. She had a doctorate and academic publications, but that was before Richard, her husband, lost everything in a bad investment. Before he started drinking. Before the debts that consumed their home, their savings, her career. Before he left, leaving her with the bills and the shame. She had tried to return to academia, but the doors were closed. Too much time away, they said. The market had changed. There were younger, more up-to-date candidates, so she took the cleaning job. It was temporary, she thought at the time. Just until things got better. That was 8 years ago. That night, Margaret slept poorly. She dreamed of those documents with the Arabic words dancing on the pages, with Richard signing his own sentence. She woke up at 5 in the morning with a decision made. She would try again. The next day, Margaret arrived at work determined. But before she could look for Richard, she was called into the office of Teresa Fields, the cleaning supervisor. Teresa was 63 and had worked at Anderson Industries for 30 years. She knew every corner of that building and every secret that circulated through the halls. "Sit down, Margaret." Teresa's voice was serious. "Has something happened, Mrs. Teresa? Mr. Richard came to me yesterday. He said you were meddling in matters that don't concern you." Margaret felt her stomach tighten. "I was just trying to help, Mrs. Teresa. I saw a document and you think you're in a position to help the owner of the company?" Teresa leaned forward. "Margaret, I like you. You're a good employee, punctual, no trouble. But you need to understand your place here." "But the contract is wrong, Mrs. Teresa. The translation is lying to him." "Girl, you're a cleaner. You're not a lawyer, not a translator, not a consultant." Teresa sighed. "Look, I don't know what you saw or think you saw, but Mr. Richard has professionals handling this. He doesn't need us meddling." "You don't understand. I've worked with this before. I can recognize when—" "Worked with this?" Teresa raised an eyebrow. "Margaret, you clean offices, that's the reality. If you keep insisting on this, you'll end up losing your job. And at your age, with the job market as it is, finding another job won't be easy. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing." Teresa's words echoed in Margaret's mind for the rest of the day. She knew the supervisor was right about one thing. Losing this job would be a disaster. But how could she simply ignore what she knew? How could she let Richard walk straight into a trap? During lunch, Margaret was alone in the basement break room, where the cleaning staff had their meals. She heated her lunch in the microwave and sat at one of the plastic tables. The place had a smell of detergent mixed with reheated food that she no longer even noticed. "Can I sit here?" Margaret looked up and saw Cynthia, one of the younger cleaners. She was 24 and always smiling, always with some story to tell. "Of course, Cynthia. I heard you got into trouble with the boss." Cynthia opened her lunchbox and started eating. "Is it true? Who told you that?" "Oh, you know how it is. In this building, everyone finds out about everything." She took a bite of rice. "So, is it true?" Margaret sighed. "I just tried to warn him about a problem I saw. And he didn't want to listen?" "No." Cynthia shook her head. "Rich people are like that. They think we're invisible, that we have nothing in our heads. My mother always said poor people are only good for working, not for thinking." "It's not quite like that, Cynthia. It's more complicated." "Yes, it is," the young woman insisted. "My boyfriend works as a rideshare driver. The other day, he found a wallet with a lot of money in the back seat. When he went to return it to the owner, the guy didn't even thank him properly. Treated him like it was an obligation, you know. Margaret ate in silence, thinking. Cynthia was partly right. There was an invisible barrier between people like her and people like Richard. A barrier built with diplomas hanging on the wall, important last names, expensive suits. But Margaret had been on the other side of that barrier once. She knew it wasn't that simple. In the afternoon, while cleaning the 10th floor, Margaret passed by Richard's office. The door was slightly open and she heard voices. She recognized Richard's voice and another that must have been the translator, Samir's. "So everything is ready for the signing on Friday?" Richard asked. "Yes, Mr. Richard. Mr. Al-Farouk is very excited. This investment will change everything for your company." "I know. Finally, we'll be able to compete on equal footing with the big ones. My father always dreamed of this. Your father would be proud." Samir's voice was smooth, almost hypnotic. "You're making the right choice." Margaret tightened her grip on the broom handle. Friday. That gave her 3 days. 3 days to find a way to convince Richard, or at least gather concrete evidence of the scam. That night she did something she hadn't done in years. She called Faith, her old college friend. They had been close when Margaret still taught, but contact faded when her life fell apart. "Margaret?" Faith's voice sounded surprised. "Wow, it's been so long. How are you?" "Hi, Faith. I know it's been a long time since we talked. I need a favor." "Of course, go ahead." "Do you still have contacts with those sworn translation people? That office that did work for the university?" "Yes, I do. Why?" Margaret explained the situation, leaving out the more personal details. Faith listened in silence. "Margaret, this is very serious. If you're right, this businessman is going to lose everything." "I know. That's why I need help. I need someone who can confirm what I'm saying, someone with credibility. The problem is that certified translators can't simply review another's work without a formal request. It would be unethical. But there must be something that—" "Wait," Faith paused. "Let me think. Do you have a picture of this contract?" "No, but I can take one tomorrow." "Take it. Send it to me. I'll take a look and see what I can do. I'm not promising anything, but I'll try." "Thank you, Faith, really. You don't know how much this means." "Margaret?" Faith's voice softened. "We miss you at the university. You were always brilliant. One of the best professors I've known." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. "Thank you. That means a lot." After hanging up, she sat in the living room for a long time, holding the phone. Those words had stirred something inside her, something that had been buried for a long time, a memory of who she used to be. The next day, Margaret arrived at work with her phone in her pocket. It was a simple old device, but it had a camera. She waited until late afternoon, when the offices began to empty. Then she went up to the 10th floor and entered the conference room. The documents were still there, organized in folders on the table. Margaret looked around, her heart pounding. With trembling hands, she opened the main folder and found the contract in Arabic. She took several photos, making sure each page was legible. "What do you think you're doing?" Margaret froze. She turned slowly and saw Jason at the door, arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. "I was cleaning and—" "You were taking pictures of confidential documents." Jason entered the room. "This is very serious, Margaret. Very serious indeed. Jason, please let me explain." "Explain what? That you're stealing company information? That you might be selling trade secrets? It's nothing like that. I just want to prove the contract is wrong." "Oh yes, the cleaning lady's conspiracy theory." He took the phone from her hand. "I think Mr. Richard will want to know about this." "Jason, please." But he was already leaving the room with her phone. Margaret followed him down the hall, trying to explain, but Jason ignored her pleas. He knocked on Richard's door and entered without waiting for a response. "Mr. Richard, sorry to interrupt, but I need to show you something urgent." Margaret stood at the door watching Jason show the phone to Richard. She saw the businessman's expression change from curiosity to anger. "Margaret." Richard rose from his chair. "Come in here, now." She entered on shaky legs. Jason stood beside Richard, a smug smile on his face. Were you photographing confidential documents from my company? Richard asked, his voice dangerously calm. I can explain, Mr. Richard. I just wanted to get evidence to show that— Evidence? He interrupted. You invaded my privacy, violated the company's trust, committed an act that could have legal consequences, and you're talking to me about evidence. You don't understand. The contract is my problem. Richard slammed his hand on the desk. Not yours, you're a cleaning lady. Your only concern here should be cleaning floors and emptying trash cans. The words cut Margaret like knives. She felt tears burning her eyes, but held them back. Jason, call the cleaning supervisor. Richard took Margaret's phone. Margaret, you're suspended indefinitely. I'll evaluate whether to sue you for breach of confidentiality or just fire you. You can go. Mr. Richard, please just listen to me for a minute. Get out of my office, he shouted. Margaret staggered out. In the hallway, she passed other employees who looked at her with curiosity or pity. She went down to the locker room, grabbed her things, and left the building without looking back. Outside, night had already fallen. Margaret Thompson started walking aimlessly, tears finally streaming down her face. She had lost everything again: her job, her dignity, her last attempt to do what was right. When she finally stopped, she was in front of a small church. Margaret wasn't particularly religious, but something made her go in. The place was empty, silent. She sat on one of the wooden benches and let the crying come, all the weight of the last few years, all the frustration and pain. Are you okay? A soft voice asked. Margaret looked up and saw an elderly lady sitting next to her. She must have been about 70, with grey hair tied in a bun, kind eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb. You're not disturbing, dear. Sometimes we just need a quiet place to let things out. The lady offered a tissue. My name is Helen. Margaret. She took the tissue and dried her face. Work problems? Helen asked gently. How did you know? I'm 72, my dear. I've seen a lot. And the desperation that comes from work has a specific look. Margaret didn't know why, but she started telling everything to this stranger. Maybe it was because she desperately needed to talk to someone who would listen. Helen listened quietly, just nodding her head from time to time. You know what I think? Helen said when Margaret finished. I think you did the right thing, and I think you shouldn't give up. But I lost my job. My boss hates me. He doesn't even want to listen to me. Then maybe you need to find someone else who will listen. Does he have a family? Yes. A wife and a son, I think. I've never seen them. Sometimes the people we love can make us see what arrogance won't let us. Helen stood up. Don't give up, Margaret. You have knowledge and experience. That's worth more than any position. Don't let anyone make you forget that. After Helen left, Margaret stayed there a while longer, thinking, the lady was right. She couldn't give up. Not when she knew that Richard was about to lose everything his father had built. In the following days, Margaret tried various approaches. First, she got Richard's office number online and called to try to schedule a meeting. The secretary was polite but firm. Dr. Richard was not receiving visitors, and certainly not a former employee who had been suspended. Then she tried sending an email. She wrote everything she knew about the contract, explained her academic background, attached her old resume. She never got a reply. Faith called midweek. Margaret, I managed to show the photos to a colleague of mine. He's a certified translator and agrees with you. The Arabic contract is completely different from the Portuguese translation. It's a sophisticated scam. Can you put that in writing? Something official? I can, but it will take a few days to prepare a proper technical report. And there's the problem that he would need access to the original document to make it official. We don't have a few days. The signing is tomorrow. Tomorrow? Faith paused. Then there won't be time, Margaret. I'm sorry. After hanging up, Margaret sat at the kitchen table and put her head in her hands. It was Friday morning. The signing would be in the afternoon. She was out of options. It was then that she remembered Helen's words. He has a family, a wife and a son. Margaret took her old computer and started researching. It wasn't hard to find information about the Anderson family. Richard had been married to Marian Anderson for 15 years. She came from a traditional New York family and had an active social media profile. Margaret created a new account and sent a message to Marion. She explained who she was, what she had seen, and begged her to talk to her husband. She didn't expect a response, but it was her last attempt. To her surprise, Marion replied 2 hours later. "Who are you? How dare you contact me with these absurd accusations? My husband already told me about you. You were fired for stealing confidential information. If you keep bothering me, I'll take legal action." Margaret felt the last thread of hope snap. It was useless. No one would believe her. Richard would sign the contract, lose his company, and she could do nothing. She spent the rest of the day wandering around the house, unable to focus on anything. The afternoon came, and she imagined Richard in the meeting room, pen in hand, smiling as he signed his own sentence. She pictured Samir, the fake translator, watching with satisfaction. She imagined the Arabic investor, knowing that in 2 years he would own everything. The phone rang at 6 in the evening. It was an unknown number. "Hello? Margaret?" It was a young woman's voice. "My name is Lily Anderson. I'm Richard's daughter." Margaret gripped the phone tighter. "Lily, I saw the message you sent my mum. She showed me. She was laughing, saying some crazy woman was trying to sabotage my dad's deal. But I study Arabic in school, and I got curious." "You study Arabic?" "Yes. I'm part of a cultural exchange program." Lily's voice was hesitant. "I took pictures of the contract from my dad's computer. He saves everything in the cloud, and you're right. The translation is completely wrong." Margaret felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. I don't understand everything, but I understand enough, and I showed it to my Arabic teacher. She confirmed it. This contract will give the entire company to the investor in 2 years. Lily, you need to tell your father. Now." "I tried." The girl sounded desperate. "But he won't listen to me. Says I'm a child, that I don't understand business. He already signed the first part of the contract today. Says the final signing is next Monday." "Monday?" Margaret thought quickly. "You mean we still have time?" "Not much. And I don't know what to do. My dad is so excited about this deal. He thinks he's finally fulfilling my grandfather's dream. He won't believe me. He might not believe you, but maybe he'll believe concrete evidence." "What kind of evidence?" Margaret thought. There was something Faith had said about the translator, about professional ethics, and there was something else she had noticed when she saw Samir in the hallway, something about the way he spoke, how he moved. "Lily, do you know anything about this translator? This Samir guy?" "Not much, only that he showed up a few months ago, offered to work with my dad. Said he had a lot of experience with international contracts." "A few months," Margaret repeated, "right around the time the Arabic investor contacted your dad." "Yeah. Now that you mention it, yes. It all happened around the same time." "Lily, I need your help. Do you trust me?" There was a long pause. "My mom said you're a crazy cleaning lady, but my Arabic teacher said the translation is wrong, and I learned to always trust science, the facts. The facts say you're right. Then help me. We need to find out who this Samir really is." Over the next 2 days, Margaret and Lily worked together, communicating through messages and calls. Lily had access to her father's computers and got information about Samir: full name, documents, address. Margaret used her old academic contacts to verify Samir's credentials. What she found was concerning. Samir al-Najjar had a sworn translator record, but it was recent, only 6 months old. Before this, there was no professional record of him. It was as if he had appeared out of nowhere. "That's strange, isn't it?" Lily asked during a call. "Very strange." Margaret was sitting at her computer, looking at the search results. "And there's more. I managed to find his profile on social media. There are photos of him with that Arabic investor from over a year ago. They knew each other long before Samir showed up offering his services to your father. So they planned this from the beginning. It seems so, but we need more evidence, something concrete that your father can't ignore." "What if we recorded one of their conversations?" Lily suggested. My father is having meetings with Samir and the investor almost every day now. Recording without consent could be illegal, Lily. And even if it weren't, how would you do it? I live in the same house, Lily said. My father sometimes works from home and Samir has been here a few times. Margaret didn't like the idea of putting a teenager in a potentially dangerous situation, but she was running out of options. If you do this, you need to be very careful. And if they say anything that seems threatening, you stop immediately and leave. I'll be careful, I promise. On Saturday, Lily called excitedly. I did it. Samir came over this morning. He and my father were talking in the library. I hid my phone recording under a pile of books. And did you record anything useful? Better than that, Lily was almost shouting. Samir got a call and left the library to answer it. I heard him speaking in Arabic. Margaret, he was laughing, telling the person on the other end that my father was an idiot easy to fool, that the deal would be complete soon. Did you record that? Every word. Lily, you're brilliant. Send me the audio, now. When Margaret heard the recording, she felt a mix of anger and satisfaction. It was exactly what they needed. Samir clearly talking about the scam, about how he was deceiving Richard, about the plan to take over the company. But there was still a problem. How to make Richard listen. My mother is the key, Lily said when Margaret shared her concern. She's proud and doesn't like to admit she's wrong. But she loves my father, and if she truly believes he's in danger, she'll make him listen. But she's already made it clear she doesn't believe me. In you, no, but in her own daughter, that's different. Lily was right. That night she showed everything to her mother. The incorrect translations confirmed by the Arabic teacher, the research on Samir, the photos of him with the investor from before meeting Richard, and most importantly, the recording. Marian Anderson listened to everything in silence. When the audio ended, she stared at her daughter for a long time. Are you absolutely sure about all this? She asked finally. Mom, I showed it to my teacher. She has a PhD in Oriental languages. She confirmed the translation is wrong. And this woman, this Margaret, who guarantees she's not behind some scheme? Mom, I researched her. She was a university professor, has an amazing resume. She knows what she's talking about. Marian rubbed her face. If this is true, if your father is really being deceived... She didn't finish the sentence. You need to make him listen, Lily insisted. Please. Sunday evening, Margaret received a call. It was Marian. Margaret, it's Marian Anderson. We need to talk. They arranged to meet at a downtown cafe the next morning. Margaret arrived early, nervous. She chose a table in the corner and ordered a simple coffee she could barely drink. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Marian arrived promptly at 9. She was an elegant woman of 42, with well-kept blonde hair and understated but clearly expensive designer clothes. She sat across from Margaret and studied her with critical eyes. You really were a university professor? Marian asked bluntly. I was, for 12 years. And how did you end up cleaning offices? Margaret took a deep breath. Life doesn't always go according to plan. Sometimes things fall apart and we do what we can to survive. Marian nodded slowly. My daughter showed me everything. The research, the translations, the recording. She paused. I wanted not to believe it. I wanted to think it was some kind of scheme, some revenge of yours for being fired. But the facts are all there. I never meant to harm your husband, Margaret said. I just couldn't stay silent knowing what that contract really said. And you're absolutely certain Richard will lose the company? I have no doubts. The Arabic contract is clear. It transfers full ownership after 24 months. The clauses about profit sharing are just a smokescreen. Marian picked up her purse and took out an envelope. Then we need to do something. The final signing is this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Can you be there? Me? At the office? Your husband threw me out of there. He'll never let me in. Then we won't ask for permission. Marian had a determination in her eyes that reminded Margaret of herself many years ago. You know the building better than anyone. There must be a way to get in without being seen. There is, Margaret thought quickly. The service entrance in the back. I have the key. Well, I had it. They must have changed the lock after they suspended me. What if they didn't? Then I can get in. But then what? How do we make Richard stop and listen? Leave that to me. Marion put the envelope away. I just need you to be there with all the evidence, and with your former colleague, that translator. Faith? She's preparing a technical report, but she said it will take time. We don't need a full report. We just need her there to confirm what you're saying. A professional with credentials who can speak with authority. Can you convince her? Margaret thought. Faith had been a good friend, but asking this was a lot. I can try. After Marion left, Margaret sat in the cafe longer, processing everything. She was about to break into the building where she had been suspended, interrupt an important business meeting, potentially get into serious legal trouble. But if she did nothing, Richard would lose everything. She called Faith. Margaret? What a surprise. Faith, I need you this afternoon. It's urgent. Today? I have class at... Please, Margaret interrupted. You're the only person who can help. You have the credentials, the knowledge. If you don't come, a man is going to lose his family business because of a scam that I know you can prove. There was a long pause. What time and where? At 2:40 in the afternoon, Margaret was in the back of the Anderson Industries building, holding her old key. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear the blood pulsing in her ears. Faith was by her side, dressed formally, with a briefcase containing the preliminary contract analyses. Are you sure about this? Faith asked. Because if this key doesn't work, we're going to look like two crazy women trying to break into a building. Only one way to find out. Margaret put the key in the lock. The lock clicked and the door opened. The two exchanged a look and entered. The building was different during the day, full of employees, movement, life. Margaret led Faith through the service corridors, avoiding the busier areas. They went up the emergency stairs, stopping on each floor to check if the way was clear. When they reached the 10th floor, Margaret Thompson peeked through the door. The hallway was empty, but she could see movement in the main conference room. Through the semi-opaque glass walls, she made out several silhouettes. That's it, she whispered to Faith. Now what? Now we wait for the signal. They hid in a small cleaning supply closet. Margaret knew every corner of that building, every hiding spot. It felt strange to be there again, not as an employee, but as an intruder. The minutes dragged on. Margaret looked at her watch. 3:15. The meeting must be happening. Marion said she would give the signal. But what signal? How would they know when to enter? That's when they heard it. Loud voices coming from the conference room. An argument. Marion was playing her part in the plan. Margaret and Faith left the closet and approached the room. Through the glass, they could see Richard sitting at the table, visibly upset. Marion was standing, gesturing. Samir was beside the businessman, trying to calm him down. And there was another man, wearing traditional Arabic clothing, who must be the investor. No, Marion, Richard's voice cut through the door. You're not going to ruin this. This deal is too important. Richard, please, just listen to me, Marion pleaded. Our daughter found something about the contract. Lily is a child. She doesn't understand business. She understands Arabic and the contract is wrong. Samir stepped forward. Mrs. Anderson, with all due respect, but this is ridiculous. I've been a professional translator for years. This suggestion that I made a mistake is... It wasn't a mistake, Marion interrupted. It was intentional. The Arabic investor, who had remained silent, finally spoke. His voice was soft but firm. That is a very serious accusation, ma'am. I hope you have proof. It was then that Marion looked toward the door and gave a slight nod. Margaret took a deep breath. Let's go, she said to Faith. The two entered the room. The effect was immediate. Richard stood up from his chair, his face red with anger. You, how dare you come in here? I'm calling security. Richard, wait. Marion grabbed her husband's arm. You need to hear what she has to say. She's a cleaner who stole confidential information. She was suspended. She's also a university professor with a doctorate in languages, Marion said firmly. And this woman beside her is a certified translator. They have something to show you. Margaret stepped forward. Her hands were trembling, but her voice came out steady. Dr. Richard, I know you have no reason to trust me. I know how this must look. But please, just give me 5 minutes. If after that you still want to kick me out and call security, I'll leave without resisting." Richard looked at his wife, then at Margaret, then at Faith with her professional attire and executive briefcase. 5 minutes, he said finally. "But if this is some kind of act, I swear—" "It's not an act." Faith stepped forward and placed the briefcase on the table. "My name is Faith Azevedo. I've been a certified Arabic translator for 20 years and a professor at the State University. I came here today because my colleague Margaret showed me photos of a contract that deeply concerned me." She opened the briefcase and spread documents on the table. "This is the contract you are about to sign." She pointed to the pages. "And this is the translation that was provided to you. Now look here. This clause in Arabic talks about full ownership transfer after 24 months. But in the Portuguese translation, it only mentions profit sharing." Richard picked up the documents, his face pale. "This must be an interpretation error." Samir had grown very quiet. He looked at the Arabic investor who maintained an impassive expression. "Dr. Richard, that is a very particular interpretation," Samir began. "The nuances of Arabic can be—" "There's no nuance whatsoever," Faith interrupted. "The language is clear, absolutely unequivocal. Any competent translator would see that immediately." "Are you questioning my competence?" Samir tried to sound indignant, but his voice faltered. "I'm saying you're either extremely incompetent or deliberately deceiving your client." Faith turned to Richard. "And I have reason to believe it's the latter." Marion then delivered the final blow. She took her phone and began playing the audio Lily had recorded. Samir's voice filled the room, speaking in Arabic, laughing, calling Richard an easy fool to deceive. "Can someone translate this?" Richard asked, his voice tense. Faith listened carefully and then began translating, her voice clear and professional. With each word, Richard grew paler, more tense. When the translation ended, he slowly turned to Samir. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Is all of this true?" Samir opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The Arabic investor stood up calmly. "Mr. Anderson, there's clearly some misunderstanding here. I suggest we postpone this meeting until we can properly clarify everything." "Misunderstanding?" Richard let out a humorless laugh. "You were trying to steal my company." "Steal is a very strong word." The investor kept his voice calm. "We have a legal contract that—" "A contract based on fraud," Marion interrupted. "My husband was deliberately deceived." "These are serious accusations." The investor looked coldly at Samir. "I'll need to consult my lawyers before proceeding." He walked toward the door, but Richard blocked his path. "You're not going anywhere until you explain what's happening here." "Mr. Anderson, I suggest you remove your hand from my arm," the investor said calmly. "Or this could become a much bigger problem than it already is." "Let him go, Richard." Marion touched her husband's shoulder. "Let them go. We have what we need. We have the evidence, we have witnesses, we have everything documented." Richard released the investor's arm, who quickly left, followed by a visibly shaken Samir. When the door closed, Richard collapsed into the chair, putting his head in his hands. "I was going to lose everything," he murmured. "Everything my father built, because of my arrogance, my stupidity." Margaret Thompson stood still, not knowing what to say. Marion approached her husband and put her hand on his shoulder. "You didn't lose anything," she said softly. "It's all still here. Thanks to people who cared enough to try to warn you." Richard looked up and gazed at Margaret. For the first time since he'd known her, he seemed to truly see her. Not as a cleaning lady, not as an obstacle, but as a person. "You tried to warn me," he said, "from the beginning, and I treated you like—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Margaret knew what he meant. "I understand why you didn't believe me," Margaret said. "I know how it looked, a cleaning lady claiming to know more than a professional translator, but I couldn't just ignore what I knew." "Why?" Richard asked. "Why did you care so much? After how I treated you, you could have just let me sign that contract and ruin everything. Why didn't you?" Margaret thought before answering. "Because I've lost everything once before. I know how it hurts. I know what it's like to see the life you built collapse. And because, despite everything, I still believe doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard, even when no one listens to you." Richard stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood up and extended his hand. "Forgive me," he said. "For everything. For the arrogance, for the disrespect, for not listening when you were trying to help." Margaret shook his hand, feeling a lump in her throat. "You're forgiven." "And Margaret," Richard continued, "you're hired, not as a cleaner, as an international contracts consultant. If you accept, of course." Margaret felt tears burning her eyes. I accept. Thank you." In the following weeks, much changed at Anderson Industries. Richard hired a specialized lawyer to investigate the scam. They discovered that the Arabic investor had tried the same scheme with other American companies. 3 of them had fallen for the scam and lost their businesses. Samir had been an accomplice in all of them. The story reached the specialized press. Business magazines published articles about the case, warning other entrepreneurs about this type of fraud. Margaret was interviewed several times, always accompanied by Faith, explaining how to identify fraudulent translations. The exposure brought unexpected results. Other companies began seeking out Margaret to review international contracts. She, who had spent years cleaning offices, was now sought after as an expert. But not everything was easy. There were challenges. Teresa Fields, the cleaning supervisor, approached Margaret a week after the events. They met at the cafe where Margaret used to have lunch when she was a cleaner. "I need to apologize to you," Teresa said as soon as she sat down. "I treated you poorly. I told you to stay in your place, not to meddle where you weren't called. You were protecting my job, Miss Teresa. I understand." "No." Teresa shook her head. "I was protecting mine. I'm afraid of losing my position, of looking like I don't control my team. So when you tried to do something different, something beyond what was expected, I reprimanded you, and I was wrong." "You weren't wrong to worry," Margaret touched Teresa's hand. "It's hard for us, women of our age, in this market. We do what we can to survive." "Even so," Teresa wiped her eyes, "you taught me something. That no matter what our position is, we always have value. We always have knowledge that can help." There was also the issue with some long-time employees who didn't like Margaret's sudden rise. Jason, the assistant who had caught her photographing the documents, was particularly hostile. "So now you're a consultant?" he said sarcastically when they crossed paths in the hallway. "How convenient. Create a little problem, pretend to solve it, and get a promotion." "Jason, I didn't create any problem," Margaret replied calmly. "I identified a real fraud. If it even was fraud, maybe you and that translator exaggerated everything to promote yourselves." "You can think whatever you want." Margaret started to walk away. "You know what your problem is?" Jason followed her. "You think you're better than everyone else, that because you were a teacher once, you're special, but in the end, you're just a lucky cleaner." Margaret stopped and turned to face him. "You know what your problem is, Jason? You're so worried about keeping people in boxes that you can't see the value each person has. I was a teacher, yes, and I was a cleaner too, and I learned something valuable in both positions, that honest work has dignity, no matter what it is. What doesn't have dignity is trying to belittle others to feel bigger." She walked away, leaving Jason speechless. But the biggest challenge came from within Margaret herself. After years of cleaning offices, of keeping her head down and accepting her place, it wasn't easy to see herself again as a qualified professional. There were moments of insecurity, of doubt. One afternoon, she was in her new office, small but with a window overlooking the city, reviewing a contract in French when Richard entered. "Margaret, do you have a minute?" "Of course, Dr. Richard. Please, just Richard." He sat across from her. "I wanted to talk about the new contract with the French company. Have you had time to review it?" "I did. And I found some clauses that worry me." She began to explain but stopped when she saw his expression. "Is something wrong?" "No, it's just—" Richard hesitated. "It's strange, you know. A few weeks ago you were cleaning my office, and now you're saving me again from making a bad deal. Richard, if you think I'm not qualified to—" "That's not it," he interrupted. It's the exact opposite. You're extremely qualified, and I keep wondering how someone with your knowledge ended up cleaning offices. Margaret Thompson fell silent for a moment. It was a question she asked herself every day. Life isn't always fair, she said finally. Sometimes things fall apart, and we take what we can get. But that doesn't mean we lose who we are inside. You're right, Richard nodded. And you know, after all this, I started paying more attention to the people who work here. Not just the executives, but everyone. And I discovered incredible stories. Cynthia from cleaning, she's studying business administration at night. Mark from the stockroom. He has a pending patent for a tool he developed. We have so much talent in this company that I was completely blind to see. And what are you going to do about it? Change things, Richard smiled. I've already started. I created an internal development program. We'll identify employees with potential and give them growth opportunities. Education, training, mentorships. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That's wonderful, Richard. You're the one who taught me. He stood up to leave, but stopped at the door. Oh, and Margaret, I'm going to make a formal proposal. I want you to develop and coordinate our new international due diligence department. Salary and benefits appropriate for the position, your own team, everything official. What do you think? Margaret felt tears in her eyes. Thank you, really, thank you. But with success also came unexpected complications. About a month after the events, Margaret received a surprise visit. Richard, her ex-husband, showed up at her office. She recognized him immediately, despite the years. He was thinner, with graying hair he didn't have before, and clothes that had seen better days. But the eyes were the same. Hi, Maggie. He used the nickname she used to love and now hated. What are you doing here, Richard? I saw the article about you in the magazine, he approached. My ex-wife, now a consultant for a big company. Who would have thought? Richard, I have nothing to say to you. I know I hurt you. He lowered his head. I know I ruined everything, but I'm trying to start over and thought maybe you could help me. Maybe get me a job here or... Are you kidding me? Margaret felt anger rising. You left me with all the debts. You abandoned me when I needed you most, and now you come back here asking for favors. I was sick, Maggie, the drinking, the problems, but I'm in recovery now. I've changed. Great. I'm happy for you. Margaret stood up. But that has nothing to do with me. You made your choices, I made mine, and there's nothing left between us. But we were married for 15 years. That has to mean something. It did, Margaret said firmly. Until you threw it all away. Now please leave. I have work to do. After Richard left, Margaret sat for a long time, trembling. Seeing him again had stirred up things she thought she'd buried. Memories of who she had been, of how everything had fallen apart. Marian Anderson, who had become friends with Margaret in recent weeks, appeared at the door. I saw a man leaving your office. It seemed tense. Is everything okay? My ex-husband. Margaret Thompson said simply, Oh. Marian Anderson entered and closed the door. May I sit? Margaret nodded yes. Marian pulled up a chair. Do you want to talk about it? And then, to her own surprise, Margaret began to speak. She told about her marriage, about how Richard had lost everything in bad investments, about the drinking, the debts, the abandonment. She told about losing her career, her home, her dignity, about accepting the cleaning job because it was all she could get. Marian listened in silence, just nodding her head from time to time. I hadn't told this to anyone here, Margaret said finally. I was ashamed. Ashamed of what? Marian asked gently. Of having survived, of having done what you needed to do to move forward, of having fallen so low. You didn't fall, Marian said firmly. You were pushed down, there's a difference. And what did you do after you got up, alone, without anyone's help? That's not a reason for shame. It's a reason for pride. It doesn't seem that way. Margaret, I grew up rich. I had everything in life. The best schools, the best opportunities. I never had to fight for anything. Marian looked out the window. Do you think I would have the courage to do what you did? To accept working, cleaning after being a teacher? To insist on doing the right thing even when everyone was against you? I admire you, truly. Margaret felt the tears streaming. Thank you, she whispered. That night when Margaret got home, she took the old photo off the wall. The photo of her with her diploma, smiling. She looked at that young woman full of hopes and dreams and realized something. She hadn't lost that woman. That woman was still there, just stronger, wiser, more resilient. The following months brought more changes. The due diligence department that Margaret headed grew. She hired 3 assistants, all people with stories similar to hers. Qualified professionals who, for different reasons, had ended up in positions below their abilities. There was Paul, a trained lawyer who worked as a night security guard because he couldn't pay the Bar Association fees. Margaret not only hired him, but helped him regularize his professional situation. There was Andrea, an accountant who had spent years without working to care for her sick mother. When she tried to return to the market, she found that her skills were considered obsolete. Margaret trained her in new technologies and systems. And there was Robert, an engineer who had lost everything in a financial scam similar to what almost destroyed Richard Anderson. He was working as a delivery driver for an app when Margaret found him. Today, he leads the technical analysis team. "You're building a team of broken people," Jason commented once with his usual sarcasm. "No," Margaret answered. "I'm building a team of people who understand the value of second chances and who know how to work hard because they've lost everything once and won't let that happen again." And she was right. Margaret's team quickly became one of the most efficient in the company. They reviewed contracts with meticulous care, identifying not only obvious frauds, but also problematic clauses and hidden risks. In 6 months, they had prevented 3 bad contracts that would have cost the company millions. Richard began recommending Margaret's services to other business people, and soon she was consulting for several companies. It was during one of these consultancies that Margaret faced her biggest challenge since the Arabic contract case. A medium-sized textile company in Chicago was negotiating a merger with a Chinese company. The contract seemed perfect, all clauses well written, the translation apparently correct. But something bothered Margaret. "I can't put my finger on it, but something's wrong," she said to Paul, who was helping with the analysis. "All the clauses we reviewed seem normal." Paul flipped through the pages. "What worries you?" "That's just it. It's too perfect. Complex contracts always have negotiation points, clauses that need adjusting. This one has none of that." Maybe their lawyers are just very good. Or maybe the problem isn't what's written, but what isn't. Margaret spent the next 3 days comparing that contract with standard merger templates. And then she saw it. There was a clause that should normally be there and wasn't. A clause about management continuity. "They don't specify who will manage the company after the merger," she explained to the client, which means technically the Chinese company could fire the entire current board the day after signing, but they verbally assured us that wouldn't happen. The textile company owner protested. "Verbal assurances mean nothing in court." Margaret was firm. "If it's not in the contract, it doesn't exist." The client insisted on proceeding, but Margaret threatened to withdraw from the case if he didn't demand the clause's inclusion. In the end, he agreed, and it was good that he did. During the negotiation of the new clause, the Chinese resisted so much that it became obvious they had planned exactly what Margaret predicted, to take full control and fire the American board. The client ultimately called off the merger and thanked Margaret profusely. "You saved me again," he said. "How do you always know?" "Experience," Margaret replied. "And scars. You learn to recognize danger when you've been hurt before." Margaret's reputation grew. Business magazines ran stories about her unusual history, about how she went from being a cleaner to a respected consultant. She started receiving invitations for lectures, for workshops on identifying contract fraud. At one of these lectures at the New York Chamber of Commerce, Margaret met someone she hadn't seen in a long time. Helen, the lady who had comforted her in church that terrible night, months ago. "Margaret," Helen approached after the lecture, "I saw the article about you in the magazine. I was so proud." "Helen," Margaret hugged her, "what a wonderful surprise to see you here. My son is a businessman. He brought me to your lecture. Helen smiled. You look so different from that day in church. I am. Thanks in part to you. Me? I only said a few words. But they were the words I needed to hear. Margaret held Helen's hands. You reminded me not to give up, and I didn't. Helen had tears in her eyes. My dear, sometimes we meet people at the right moment. I was in church that day because I had lost my husband not long before. I was feeling useless, as if my life had no purpose left. But when I saw you there, so desperate, something inside me woke up. I realized I could still help, I could still make a difference. So you saved me as much as I saved you. It was the beginning of a friendship that would become important for both of them. Helen started coming regularly to Margaret's office, bringing coffee and talking about life. She had a wisdom that came from 7 decades lived, from joys and sorrows, successes and failures. You know what's wrong with people nowadays? Helen said one day, sitting in Margaret's office drinking tea. It's that we value the climb too much, but forget that the descent is also part of life. We look at someone successful and think they've always been that way. But everyone has their falls. What matters is how you get back up. Are you talking about my story? I'm talking about life. Helen smiled. I was married for 50 years, built a family, raised 3 children. And then my husband was gone and I felt lost. I had to learn who I was without him. It was painful, but necessary. And how did you deal with it? I started doing things for myself. I went back to painting, something I loved but had abandoned. I began doing volunteer work. I made new friends. I learned that we're never too old to start over. These conversations with Helen helped Margaret process everything that had happened over the past year. The transformation of her life, the changes, the new responsibilities. Helen became a maternal figure, something Margaret hadn't had since her own mother passed away years ago. But not everything was perfect. About a year after the Arabic contract incident, Margaret received a letter. It was from Samir, the fraudulent translator. He was in prison awaiting trial for fraud. In the letter, he didn't apologize or admit guilt. Instead, he blamed her. Because of you, my life is over, the letter said. I had a career, a reputation. Now I have nothing. I hope you're satisfied. Margaret read the letter several times, feeling a mix of anger and something else. Pity? Not exactly, but a sadness for the waste. Samir was clearly intelligent, talented with languages. He could have had an honest, respectable career, but he chose the easy path, the path of fraud. She never responded to the letter. There was nothing to say. Samir had made his choices and now faced the consequences, just as Margaret had made hers and was reaping the benefits. The trial of Samir and the Arabic investor, who was named Khalid Al-Farouk, took place a few months later. Margaret was called as a witness. It was strange to be in the courtroom, seeing those men who had almost destroyed Richard sitting in the defendant's seats. During her testimony, Khalid's lawyer tried to discredit her. Ms. Thompson, isn't it true that you had a personal motive to sabotage this deal? You had been fired from Mr. Anderson's company. I was suspended for trying to warn him about the fraud, Margaret answered calmly, and I didn't sabotage anything. I only identified a deliberately incorrect translation. But you admit you held resentment against Mr. Anderson. I was frustrated at not being heard. Margaret looked directly at the lawyer, but my concern was always to prevent him from being deceived, not to get revenge. It's convenient to say that now when you've been promoted to a lucrative position in the company. There's nothing convenient about it. Margaret kept her voice steady. I risked my job, my financial security, because doing the right thing was more important than keeping my head down. If that's convenient in your opinion, then we have very different definitions of the word. The prosecutor then presented the evidence, the recording of Samir confessing to the scam, analyses from multiple translators confirming the fraud, records of Khalid applying the same scam to other companies. The trial lasted 3 weeks. In the end, both Samir and Khalid were found guilty. Samir was sentenced to 6 years in prison for fraud. Khalid received 8 years and was subject to deportation after serving his sentence. Justice has been served. Richard told Margaret after the sentence was read. It has, Margaret agreed, but she didn't feel the satisfaction she expected, only a weariness, a relief that that chapter was finally closed. Meanwhile, life went on. Margaret's company continued growing. She opened a small independent consulting firm, separate from Anderson Industries, but working in close partnership with them. Lily Anderson, who had proven instrumental in uncovering the fraud, became a frequent visitor to Margaret's office. Now 17, she was preparing to enter university and considering studying international law. "You're the one who inspired me," Lily said one day. "Seeing how you used your knowledge to do the right thing, I want to be able to do that too." "You already have," Margaret smiled. "Without you, without your courage to question and investigate, your father would have lost everything. But you were the one who spotted the problem first. You who didn't give up. And you who didn't let me give up when it seemed impossible." Margaret touched the young woman's shoulder. "Never underestimate what a determined person can do, Lily. It doesn't matter your age, your position, your status in life. What matters is the courage to act." It was also around this time that Margaret reconnected with some of her old university classmates. Faith organized a dinner and invited professors who had worked with Margaret years before. The evening was bittersweet. There were hugs, laughter, memories of better times. But there was also awkwardness. Everyone knew Margaret had fallen, that she had disappeared from academia. "It's so good to see you back, Margaret," said Professor Anthony, who had been her mentor during her doctorate. "You were missed at the university." "Thank you, Professor." Margaret smiled, but there was a twinge of pain. She wasn't back. She was in a completely different place now. "Have you ever thought about returning to teaching?" he asked. "With your recent experience, you would have so much to teach, and the doors would be open for you now." Margaret considered it. A year ago, she would have said yes immediately. Returning to the university, to academic respectability, would have been a dream come true, but now, "I appreciate the offer, Professor, but I think my place is where I am now, doing what I do." "Consulting?" He seemed surprised. "But you have so much to offer to academia." "And I have so much to offer to people who are about to make costly mistakes," Margaret said gently. "At the university, I taught theory. Now, I practice, I help. I make a real difference in people's lives. And that is more important to me now." Later, Faith pulled her aside. "Are you sure about this? Turning down the chance to come back?" "I am," Margaret said. "I loved being a professor, but that's not me anymore. I've changed, and that's okay." "You've matured," Faith observed, "and found your true purpose." "I have," Margaret smiled. "And you know what's funny? If none of that had happened, if I hadn't lost everything, if I hadn't ended up cleaning offices, I would never have been in the position to see that contract. Richard would have been cheated, and I would still be teaching about translation without ever really applying it in the real world. Are you saying it was good that you lost everything?" "No, it was awful. It was the worst time of my life." Margaret paused. "But it led me to where I am now. And where I am now is exactly where I need to be." 2 years after the contract incident, Margaret was established. Her consulting firm had 15 employees, clients all over the US, and was starting to receive international contracts. She had moved to a larger apartment, not luxurious but comfortable. She had financial stability for the first time in years. It was then that Teresa Fields appeared in her office. The former cleaning supervisor was now 65 and retiring. "Margaret, I need to ask you a favor," Teresa said, visibly uncomfortable. "Of course, Mrs. Teresa, what do you need?" "It's Cynthia, the cleaning girl you know. She graduated in business administration but is having trouble finding a job. Everyone says she has no experience. I thought maybe you could, I don't know, give her a chance?" Margaret smiled. "Tell her to come talk to me. I always have room for people who work hard and are willing to learn." "Thank you." Teresa had tears in her eyes. "You know, I never properly apologized to you for how I treated you that day when you were trying to warn Dr. Richard." "Mrs. Teresa, we've already talked about this." "It's all right." "No, it's not." Teresa shook her head. "I was hard on you because I was afraid. afraid that if you stepped out of line I'd lose my job too. But you taught me something important, that sometimes doing the right thing is worth more than security. You taught me something too. Margaret touched Teresa's hand. You taught me humility. You reminded me that no matter where we are, we can always be kind, we can always help. Cynthia started working with Margaret the following week, and, as expected, she was brilliant, young, energetic, full of ideas. Margaret placed her under Paul's guidance, and the young woman flourished. You have a talent for finding broken people and fixing them, Marion commented one day when she visited Margaret's office. I don't fix them, Margaret corrected. They were never broken. They were just in situations that didn't allow their true potential to show. I just create the right environment for that to happen. Speaking of the right environments, Marion settled into the chair. Lily was accepted into Ivy University. She's going to study international law. Ivy University. Marion, that's amazing. Yes. Marion smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. And she said she was inspired by you. That she wants to be able to help people the way you helped, Richard, the way you're helping so many people. She's going to do incredible things, Margaret said with conviction. That girl has something special, courage, intelligence, and above all, compassion. Like you. Oh, Marion, I don't know if... Accept the compliment, Margaret, Marion interrupted. You changed my family, saved my husband's company, inspired my daughter, taught me not to judge people by their appearance or position. You have every right to be proud of what you've achieved. That evening, Margaret was at home when she received a call from an unknown number. Margaret Thompson? It was an older male voice. Yes, who's speaking? My name is Albert Anderson. I'm Richard's father. Margaret sat down in the chair, surprised. Richard always spoke of his father with reverence, but she thought he had passed away. Mr. Anderson, it's a pleasure. I thought that I had died. He laughed. No, I just retired and moved to the countryside, but I keep up with everything that happens with the company. My son told me about you, about how you saved the business I built with so much sacrifice. I just did what was right. You did more than that, Albert said. You had the courage to stand up when you were in a vulnerable situation, when you had everything to lose and nothing to gain. That's rare, very rare. Thank you, sir. I'm calling because I wanted to make you an offer. I'm coming back, not full-time, but as a consultant for major negotiations, and I'd like you to work with me. Your fees, your conditions. What do you think? Margaret was speechless for a moment. Mr. Anderson, it would be an honor. Great. We'll talk soon to work out the details. And Margaret, thank you for taking care of my son and the company when I wasn't there to do it. After hanging up, Margaret sat in the dark for a long time, processing everything. 3 years ago, she was cleaning offices, invisible, ignored. Now she was being sought out by one of the most respected businessmen in the industry. But it wasn't just the professional success that mattered. It was the journey, the people she met, the lessons she learned, the inner transformation she had undergone. She picked up her phone and wrote a message to Helen. Thank you for not letting me give up that day in the church. You don't know how much those words meant. The reply came almost immediately. You're the one who didn't give up, dear. I just reminded you of what you already knew. You're strong. You always have been. Margaret smiled and put away her phone. Strong. She had never seen herself that way before. She had always seen herself as someone who had failed, who had fallen. But Helen was right. She was strong. She had survived the worst and emerged on the other side, not just whole, but better. On the 3rd anniversary of the contract incident, Richard organized a party at the company. He invited all the employees, from the CEO to the cleaning staff. I'd like to make a toast, Richard said, standing up in the middle of the party. 3 years ago, I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. I was blinded by ambition, deafened by arrogance, and I would have lost everything if it weren't for a woman who had the courage to do what was right, even when everyone was against her. He looked at Margaret, who was seated between Helen and Marion. Margaret taught me that value doesn't come from position or title. It comes from character, from integrity, from courage. She taught me to see people, really see them, not just the roles they fill. And most importantly, she saved me when I needed it most, even after I had treated her in the worst possible way. The entire room was silent, everyone looking at Margaret. So this toast is to Margaret for having courage, for persevering, for being incredibly, wonderfully stubborn. Richard raised his glass. Thank you for saving not just my company, but also for reminding me of the kind of man I should be. Everyone raised their glasses. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face, but they were good tears, of gratitude, of fulfillment. After the party, she was gathering her things when Jason approached, the assistant who had been so hostile to her at the beginning. "Margaret, can I talk to you for a second?" "Of course, Jason." He looked uncomfortable. "I wanted to apologize for how I treated you. I was a complete idiot." "Jason." "No, let me finish," he interrupted. "I was jealous. You were a threat to me, or at least that's how I saw it. Someone outside the normal hierarchy who clearly knew more than many people here. I felt diminished and reacted badly. I appreciate the apology. And there's more," Jason continued. "Watching you over the past few years, how you built your team, how you helped people, I learned something. I learned that real success isn't about climbing over others. It's about lifting others up with you." "That's very beautiful, Jason." "It's not beautiful, it's true, a truth that took me too long to learn." He extended his hand. "Peace." Margaret shook his hand. "Peace." That night, Margaret arrived home exhausted but happy. Her apartment was no longer that small, cramped space. Now it had a spacious living room, a balcony with a view of the city. But what mattered most was what she felt when she walked in. Security, peace, fulfillment. She made tea and sat on the balcony, looking at the city lights. She thought about everything she had been through, the failed marriage, the lost career, the years cleaning offices, the humiliation of not being heard, of being treated as invisible. But she also thought about everything she had gained. True friends like Marion and Helen, the respect of Richard and his family, the satisfaction of helping others who were in situations similar to what she had been in, and most of all, the deep knowledge of who she really was. She was no longer that idealistic teacher from years ago, nor was she the invisible cleaning lady anymore. She was something new, forged by the fire of adversity. She was someone who knew that position doesn't define value, that a fall doesn't define failure, that the past doesn't have to dictate the future. Her phone rang. It was a message from an unknown number. "Ms. Thompson, my name is Patricia. I own a small cosmetics company. Someone recommended your work to me, saying you help business owners avoid falling for scams. I'm in the middle of an important negotiation and would like your services." Margaret smiled and began typing a response. There was always more work, more people who needed help, more stories to unravel. But not that night. That night was for her. To quietly celebrate all she had achieved, all she had survived, all she had become. She turned off her phone, finished her tea, and gazed at the stars. Somewhere up there, perhaps her father, who had passed away when she was young, was proud. Maybe her mother too. They had always believed in her, even when she stopped believing in herself. "I made it," she whispered to the night. "I fell, but I got up. I lost everything, but I rebuilt. And I'm okay. Finally, I'm okay." The following months brought new challenges and opportunities. Margaret began giving motivational talks in addition to her technical consulting. She spoke about resilience, about not giving up, about finding value in yourself regardless of external circumstances. At one of these talks in the city of Denver, a woman around 50 years old approached her afterward. "Your speech changed my life," the woman said, holding Margaret's hands. "I'm exactly where you were. I lost my marketing job 2 years ago, too. Since then, I've been cleaning houses. I was losing hope, but you showed me there's still a way." "There's always a way," Margaret held her hands in return. "It might not be the path we imagined, but there's always a way out. You just have to keep walking, even when it's dark, even when it seems impossible." "How did you endure it?" the woman asked. "How did you not give up when everyone was against you?" Margaret thought carefully before answering. "Honestly, There were days I wanted to give up, many days, but I had seen something important, something I couldn't ignore. And I realized that if I did nothing, if I didn't fight, I'd never be able to look at myself in the mirror again. So I kept going. Not because I was strong, but because not giving up was the only way to keep being who I was inside. The woman was crying. Thank you so much. Episodes like this became common. Margaret received emails, messages, letters from people who had heard her story and found strength to keep fighting. She responded to all of them, always making sure each person knew they were seen, heard, and mattered. It was also around this time that Margaret made an important decision. She created a scholarship fund for people in situations similar to what she had experienced, qualified professionals who had fallen on hard times and needed help getting back on their feet. The first recipient was a 60-year-old woman named Rachel. She had been a civil engineer, but spent years out of work to care for her husband with Alzheimer's. When he passed away, she tried to return to the job market, but discovered her certifications were outdated. I don't know how to thank you, Rachel said when Margaret presented her with the scholarship that would cover the necessary certifications. No need to thank me, Margaret smiled. You just need to do the same for someone else when you're in a position to help. Pay the kindness forward. Rachel not only obtained her certifications, but ended up being hired by Margaret's own firm. Today, she leads the Corporate Structural Analysis Department, evaluating the financial stability of potential business partners. The 4th anniversary of the contract incident brought a surprise. Margaret received an award from the U.S. Middle East Chamber of Commerce for her contribution to preventing fraud in international contracts. At the award ceremony, she was nervous. The hall was filled with important business people, diplomats, and influential figures. She felt momentarily out of place, as if she were that cleaning lady again, an intruder in a world that wasn't hers. But then she saw Helen in the audience, smiling and waving. She saw Marion and Richard with Lily, who had returned from abroad for the ceremony. She saw her team all proud seated in the front rows. She saw Teresa, Cynthia, and other cleaning staff who had been specially invited. And she realized that this was her world now. She had earned her place there, not by birth or luck, but through hard work, integrity, and courage. In her acceptance speech, Margaret didn't talk about contract analysis techniques or her academic credentials. She spoke about human value. 4 years ago, I was invisible. I cleaned offices and nobody truly saw me. I had knowledge, experience, ability, but none of it mattered because I was on the lowest rung of the social ladder. And then I saw something important, something that could save a man from losing everything. And even though I was invisible, even though I was ignored and humiliated, I didn't give up. She paused, looking at the audience. This award isn't just for me. It's for everyone who has ever felt invisible, for everyone who has been judged by their position instead of their character, for everyone who has had to fight against the assumption that title defines worth. We all have something important to contribute. We all see things that others don't. The question is, will we have the courage to speak, even when nobody wants to listen? The audience rose in applause. Margaret saw tears in many people's eyes. She saw Helen wiping her face with a handkerchief. She saw Richard applauding enthusiastically. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, several people approached Margaret. Business people wanting to hire her services, academics interested in collaborations, journalists requesting interviews. But the person who touched her heart the most was a young man in his 20s who was working serving drinks at the event. "Sorry to bother you," he said timidly, "but I heard your speech and I need to tell you that you gave me hope." Hope. I study law at night. I work here to pay for college. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong in this world, you know. Like I'll always just be the waiter. But you showed that it's possible to get there, that it can be done. Margaret took one of her business cards. "When you graduate, look me up. I always have room for determined people." The young man looked at the card as if it were gold. "Really? You would do that?" "Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most," Margaret smiled. "Now, it's my turn to do the same." 5 years after the incident that changed her life, Margaret was established. Her firm had 30 employees, offices in 3 American cities, and was beginning to expand to other Latin American countries. But what she valued most wasn't the financial or professional success. It was the network of people she had helped, and who in turn were helping others. Paul, her first hire, now had his own consulting firm. Andrea led a professional reintegration program for women who had been out of the job market for a long time. Robert taught volunteer classes for youth from underprivileged communities. It was a cascade of kindness and opportunity, all starting from that moment when Margaret decided not to remain silent. On a quiet Friday afternoon, she was in her office reviewing contracts when she received an unexpected visitor. It was Richard, her ex-husband. She hadn't seen him since that day, years ago, when he showed up asking for favors. He looked different now, cleaner, more sober, older too. "Margaret, I know I have no right to be here," he began, "but I needed to see you." "Richard, I already told you we have nothing to talk about." "I know. And you have every right to send me away. But please, just give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes and I'll never bother you again." Something in his voice made her agree. She pointed to the chair in front of her desk. 5 minutes. Richard sat down and took a deep breath. "I came to apologize. For real this time. Not because I want something from you, but because you deserve to hear this." He looked at his hands. "I destroyed everything we built together. I destroyed you, your dream, your career. And then, when you were at your lowest, I abandoned you. There's no excuse for that. None." Margaret Thompson remained silent, waiting. "I've been sober for 3 years," Richard continued, "and part of my recovery is making peace with the people I hurt. You're at the top of that list. You always have been. I loved you, Maggie, I still do, but I was sick and I hurt everyone around me." "And why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw the article about you winning that award. I saw what you became, how you overcame everything. And I realized something." He looked at her. "You were stronger without me than you ever were with me. I was holding you back, and when I left, you flew." Margaret felt something strange in her chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pain. It was a kind of closure, of understanding. "You're right," she said softly. "Our marriage was holding me back, not just you, but the idea of who I was supposed to be as your wife. When everything fell apart, when I was left alone, I had to figure out who I really was. And you know what? I'm better off alone." "I know," Richard nodded. "And I'm happy for you, truly. You deserve all the good things happening in your life. Thank you." Margaret stood up, indicating the conversation was over. "And Richard, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve the peace that comes with forgiveness." After he left, Margaret stood looking out the window for a long time. She thought about everything that man had represented in her life: love, dreams, pain, loss. But now he was just a turned page, a closed chapter. Helen called that night. "How are you, dear? Richard showed up here today." "And? How did it go?" "It was liberating," Margaret realized. "I finally closed that chapter completely. He has no power over me anymore. Not the anger, not the resentment, nothing." "That's growth," Helen said wisely. "You've gone from victim to survivor, and now you're moving from survivor to victor. Each phase has its purpose." "How did you get so wise, Helen?" 75 years of living, my child, and not being afraid to learn from every experience, good or bad." That conversation made Margaret reflect on her own aging process. She was now 57 years old. Not young anymore, but she didn't feel old either. She felt alive, vital, with so much still to do and contribute. It was this reflection that led her to start a new project, a mentorship program specifically for professionals over 50 who were having difficulty in the job market. "Society discards older people," she explained in an interview about the program, "as if experience and wisdom have no value. But I've learned the opposite is true. Older people have a perspective, a resilience that only comes with years lived. We need to value that, not discard it." The program was an immediate success. Hundreds of people signed up in the first weeks. Margaret put together a team of mentors, all successful professionals over 50, who had overcome similar obstacles. Among the mentors was Teresa, who brought her decades of experience managing teams. There was also Albert Anderson, who shared his business knowledge, and Helen, who offered emotional support and life wisdom. The results were transformative. Within 6 months, 70% of the participants had found new jobs or started their own businesses. More importantly, they had regained their confidence and their sense of self-worth. One of the success stories was Ruth, a 62-year-old accountant who had been unemployed for 3 years. "I had given up," she shared in a group meeting. "I thought I was too old, that no one would want me. But this program showed me that I still have a lot to offer, and now I have my own accounting office, focused on helping small businesses." It was around this time that Lily Anderson returned to the US after completing her master's degree at Ivy University. She was now 23 and full of plans. "Margaret, I want to work with you," she announced as soon as she arrived. "With me?" Margaret was surprised. "Lily, you have a degree from Ivy University. You could work at any major firm." "But I don't want to work at a major firm. I want to work with you, doing what you do, helping people, preventing fraud, making a real difference." Lily sat down. "You changed my life when I was 17. You showed me that intelligence and courage can allow anyone, no matter how young or insignificant they seem, to change things. Now I want to learn from you." Margaret felt tears in her eyes. "It would be an honor to have you on the team." Lily wasn't just smart and educated, she had passion, that same determination she had shown as a teenager when she helped uncover the plot against her father. She quickly became one of the firm's most effective consultants. 6 years after the Arabic contract incident, Margaret Thompson's life was completely different. She wasn't rich, but she was comfortable. She wasn't famous, but she was respected. And most importantly, she had peace. Peace with herself, with her past, with her future. On a sunny Saturday morning, she was in a park near her home, reading a book on a bench when a woman in a cleaning uniform sat down beside her. "Excuse me, are you Margaret Thompson, the consultant?" "Yes, I am. I saw you on TV in the report about your mentorship program." The woman seemed shy. "I wanted to ask, do you think someone like me, a 50-year-old cleaner, can still change her life?" Margaret closed her book and looked at the woman. She saw in her eyes that same fear, that same hopelessness she herself had felt years ago. "I know you can," Margaret said firmly, "because I was you. Not exactly you, but someone in a very similar situation. And today I'm here. It wasn't easy, it wasn't quick, but it was possible." "How?" the woman asked. "How did you do it?" "By not giving up, by recognizing my worth even when no one else did. And when the opportunity came to use my knowledge, even if it seemed impossible, even if no one wanted to listen, I didn't stay silent." Margaret took out a business card. "Call this number. It's for my mentorship program. Tell them I referred you." The woman took the card with trembling hands. "Thank you. Really. Thank you for giving me hope." "The hope was always inside you," Margaret smiled. "I just showed you where to look." After the woman left, Margaret sat on the bench a while longer, thinking, how many women like that were out there? How many talented, knowledgeable, capable people were invisible because society only saw their job title, not their value? It was this thought that led to her most ambitious project. She decided to write a book, not a technical manual on contracts, but an autobiography. Her story from her days as a teacher through the downfall, the years of cleaning, to the redemption. "Are you sure about this?" Marion asked when Margaret told her about the project. "It's very personal. You'll have to open old wounds." "I know," Margaret said, "but if my story can help even one person not to give up, it's worth it." Writing the book was harder than Margaret Thompson had imagined. There were nights when she cried over the keyboard, remembering the pain, the humiliation, the despair. But there were also moments of catharsis, of understanding, of appreciation for the journey she had traveled. The book was published a year later with the title Invisible, From Janitor to Consultant, A Story of Resilience. The reception went beyond any of Margaret's expectations. The book became a bestseller in just a few weeks. She received thousands of messages, from janitors, drivers, security guards, people in jobs considered menial, who saw themselves reflected in her story, but also from executives, business owners, successful professionals who learned to look beyond positions and titles. One of the messages that touched Margaret the most came from a college student. "My mother is a janitor. I was always ashamed of that. But after reading your book, I understand that dignity doesn't come from the work we do, but from how we do it. Thank you for teaching me to value my mother." It was during a book signing in New York that Margaret ran into someone important. Samir, the translator who had tried to deceive Richard, was in line. Margaret froze when she saw him. He had been out of prison for a few months, she knew, but she didn't expect to see him there. "Margaret," he said when it was his turn, "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I read your book and I needed to tell you something." "What do you want, Samir?" "To apologize and to thank you." "Thank me." "In prison I had a lot of time to think about the choices I made, the people I hurt." He looked at his hands. "You know what's funny? I was actually a qualified translator. I could have had an honest, respectable career, but I chose the easy way, and I lost everything. So why thank me? Because you stopped me from doing more harm. If you hadn't exposed me, I would have continued. More companies destroyed, more families ruined. You stopped me and gave me time to reflect, to change." He paused. "I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know it wasn't in vain. I've changed." Margaret studied his face. He seemed sincere, tired, marked by prison, but sincere. "What are you going to do now?" "I'm going to work as a translator again, but honestly this time, I'll rebuild my reputation step by step. It will take years, but it's what I have to do." "Then good luck," Margaret said. "And Samir, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger isn't worth it." When he left, Marion, who was with Margaret, asked, "Did you really forgive him?" "Yes," Margaret replied, "because I realized he was a broken person making bad choices, just like Richard was, just like many people are, and holding a grudge only hurts me, not him." Margaret's book brought international recognition. She was invited to speak in other countries, interviewed by major media outlets. But what made her most proud were the concrete changes she was seeing. Companies began implementing programs that valued all employees, not just executives. Some created channels where any employee, regardless of position, could report concerns or suggestions. Others started internal development programs, giving opportunities for employees in lower positions to grow. "You're changing corporate culture," Richard commented in a meeting, "making it more human, more fair." "It's not just me," Margaret said. "It's all the people who are standing up, who are demanding to be seen and valued." I just gave voice to something many already felt. 7 years after the incident that changed everything, Margaret was at the peak of her career. But she knew that true success wasn't measured in money or recognition. It was measured in lives touched, in people helped, in changes made. On a quiet evening, she was at home with Helen, Marion, and Lily. They had become a close-knit group of friends, meeting regularly for dinner and conversation. "Have you ever thought about retiring?" Helen asked. "You've worked so much, achieved so much." "Retire and do what?" Margaret laughed. "I love what I do. Every client I help, every fraud I prevent, every person I mentor, it gives me purpose. But don't you want to rest, travel, enjoy life?" "Helen, I am enjoying life, more than ever." Margaret looked at her friends. "You know, when I was cleaning offices, I thought my life was over, that all the good things had passed, but I was wrong. The best part of my life began exactly when I thought it had ended." "That's beautiful," Lily said, "and inspiring. It reminds me why I chose this path." "You're doing very well, Lily," Marion said proudly. "Your father and I are so proud." "I'm just following Margaret's example." Lily looked at her mentor. "Doing what's right, helping where I can, not staying silent when I see something wrong." "You're going beyond that," Margaret corrected. "You're creating your own path, and you're doing amazing things." Indeed, Lily was. She had developed a financial education program for small business owners, helping them understand contracts and avoid pitfalls. She had already helped over 100 businesses in just 2 years. "You know what I was thinking?" Marion said. "We should write a book together, Margaret, me, Lily, Helen, each telling our part of the story from a different perspective. It would be powerful." "That would be incredible," Lily agreed. "Showing how one act of courage not only saves one person, but creates ripples that touch so many others." Margaret considered it. It was an interesting idea, but for now she was content just being there, with these amazing women who had become her chosen family. The years kept passing. Margaret turned 60, then 62. Her hair was completely grey now, and there were more wrinkles on her face. But she had never felt more beautiful, more complete. Her firm continued growing, but sustainably, focused on quality rather than quantity. She now had 50 employees, many of them people she had mentored and helped get back on their feet. The mentorship program had expanded to 10 American cities and was beginning to establish itself in neighboring countries. Thousands of people had gone through it, finding new paths and opportunities. And the scholarship fund she had created. It had already helped over 200 people retrain and return to the workforce. On an ordinary workday, Margaret received a special visitor. It was that young waiter she had met at the awards ceremony years ago. He was now a law school graduate working at a respectable firm. "I wanted to thank you in person," he said, "for believing in me when I was just a waiter serving drinks. You gave me hope when I needed it most." "You did the hard work," Margaret said. "I just gave you a card. But you saw me, truly saw me," he insisted. "Not just as a waiter, but as a person with dreams and potential. That made all the difference." That was it, Margaret realized. In the end, everything came down to seeing and being seen, to recognizing value in every person, regardless of their title or position, to not letting social hierarchy blind us to the essential humanity in everyone. She thought about her journey, from respected teacher to invisible cleaner, and then to successful consultant. Every phase had been necessary. Every fall, every humiliation, every moment of pain had forged who she was now. If she could go back in time and avoid all that, avoid the bad marriage, the downfall, the years of cleaning, would she do it? Margaret thought honestly about it and realized she wouldn't. Because without that journey, she never would have developed the empathy she had now. She never would have understood so deeply what it means to be invisible, to be ignored, to be underestimated. And without that understanding, she could never do the work she was doing now. She could never help so many people, touch so many lives, make such a difference. One Friday afternoon, 8 years after that fateful day when she saw the Arabic contract, Margaret was in her office when Teresa appeared for a visit. "How's retirement, Mrs. Teresa?" Margaret asked. "It's great, but I miss the work sometimes," Teresa smiled. "Not the cleaning work, but the people, you know? The conversations, the feeling of being part of something." "Then come back," Margaret said impulsively. "Not as a cleaner, but as part of the team. You have decades of experience managing people, resolving conflicts, keeping things running. That's valuable." "Margaret, I'm 68 years old." "So what?" "Helen is 76 and is one of my most active consultants. Age is just a number. Experience and wisdom don't have an expiration date." Teresa thought for a moment, then smiled. "All right. When do I start?" "On Monday, if you want." And so another person found a new path, a new opportunity. Teresa became the human resources manager of the firm, using all her experience to create a work environment where everyone felt valued and respected. The success of the firm also brought challenges. There were attempts by other companies to buy Margaret's firm, generous offers that would make her rich, but she always refused. "Why?" Richard asked when she refused a particularly lucrative offer. "You could retire comfortably, live the rest of your life without worries." "Because this isn't about money, Richard," Margaret explained. "It's about purpose, about making a difference. If I sell to a big corporation, they'll turn this into just another profitable business. They'll lose focus on actually helping people." "Were you always like this?" Richard asked. "So focused on doing the right thing?" "No," Margaret admitted. "When I was a professor, I was too focused on publishing papers, on climbing the academic ladder. I lost sight of what really mattered, which was impacting lives." It took losing everything to understand that. Then perhaps the downfall was necessary. It was. Painful, but necessary. The years continued. Margaret turned 65. Her health was good, her mind as sharp as ever. She had no plans of stopping anytime soon. Helen, now 79, remained a constant presence in her life. They had developed a deep friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. "You're the daughter I never had," Helen said once. "And you're the mother I lost too early," Margaret replied, her eyes misty. They spent afternoons together talking about life, about aging, about legacy. Helen had a wisdom that came from nearly 8 decades of life, and Margaret absorbed every word. "What's the secret to a life well lived?" Margaret asked one day. "Not being afraid to be vulnerable," Helen answered. "To admit when you're wrong, to ask for help when you need it, to show your wounds. Real strength doesn't come from hiding our weaknesses, but from recognizing them and overcoming them." "You're very wise, Helen." "I'm not wise, I'm just old," Helen laughed. "And when you live long enough, you learn a few things. The main one is that nothing is as important as the people we love and the good we do." This conversation stayed with Margaret Thompson. She began thinking more about legacy, about what she would leave behind when she was no longer here. That's how the idea for the foundation came about, a non-profit organization dedicated to helping skilled professionals in vulnerable situations get back on their feet. It would be her way of ensuring the work continued, even when she was no longer there to do it. Margaret spent months planning every detail. She spoke with lawyers, accountants, non-profit organization experts. She wanted it to be perfect, to truly make a difference. The New Beginning Foundation was officially launched at an emotional ceremony. Richard and Marion were the main initial donors. Lily assumed the vice presidency. Helen became an advisor, and dozens of people Margaret had helped over the years volunteered. "You've built something that will last forever," Marion said during the ceremony. "Long after all of us are gone, this foundation will continue helping people." "That's the plan," Margaret smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "So no one else has to feel invisible and worthless like I did." The foundation began its work helping 20 people in the first year. In the second year, it was 60. In the third, over 200. The demand was immense, and Margaret worked tirelessly to secure donations and partnerships that would allow the work to expand. It was during a fundraising campaign that something unexpected happened. Margaret was at a charity event when an elegant woman of about 70 approached her. "Margaret Thompson?" the woman asked. "Yes, that's me. My name is Barbara Armstrong. I'm the president of one of the largest philanthropic foundations in the country." She extended her hand. "And I'd like to speak with you about a partnership." The conversation with Barbara opened doors Margaret had never imagined. Barbara's foundation agreed to make a substantial donation, but with one condition: Margaret would need to expand the work nationwide, not just in a few cities. "This will demand a lot from you," Barbara said. "You'll have to travel, establish partnerships in every state, train local teams. Are you ready for this?" Margaret, now 66, felt a moment of hesitation. It would be a tremendous amount of work. But then she thought of all the people who could be helped. "I'm ready," she replied. The following months were intense. Margaret traveled to 15 U.S. states, establishing branches of the New Beginning Foundation in each one. She met governors, business people, community leaders. Every trip was exhausting but also inspiring. In every city, she found people with stories similar to hers. Talented professionals who had fallen on hard times and were struggling to get back on their feet. And in every city, she left behind a support structure to help them. But the frantic pace began to take its toll. During a trip to Miami, Margaret fainted in a meeting. She was taken to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed severe exhaustion and high blood pressure. "You need to slow down," the doctor said firmly. "Your body isn't that of a 20-year-old anymore. You need to rest." Marion and Helen immediately went to Miami when they found out. "You can't go on like this," Marion said, sitting by the hospital bed. "You're going to work yourself to death." "But there are so many people who need help," Margaret protested. "And you won't help anyone if you end up in the hospital or worse," Helen said firmly. "Margaret, You've already done so much. You've already changed so many lives. But you need to take care of yourself too. It was a moment of truth for Margaret. She had spent so much time taking care of others that she forgot to take care of herself. It was time to make some adjustments. When she returned to New York, Margaret Thompson made some difficult decisions. She promoted Lily Anderson to executive director of the New Beginning Foundation, remaining as board chair but delegating day-to-day operations. She hired an experienced CEO for her consulting firm, reducing her workload. It's not giving up, she explained to Helen. It's being smart. It's recognizing my limits and ensuring the work continues, even when I can't be on the front lines. That's wisdom, Helen agreed. And it's hard. People like you who are naturally givers struggle to step back. But it's necessary. With more free time, Margaret discovered aspects of life she had neglected. She started attending painting classes, something she had always wanted to do but never had time for. She spent more time with friends, going for walks, having coffee, just talking. It was during one of these walks with Helen that something significant happened. "Margaret, I need to tell you something," Helen said, stopping at a park bench. "What is it? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Better than I've been in years, actually. But I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For giving me purpose again." Helen had tears in her eyes. "When my husband passed away, I felt useless, as if my life had ended. But you showed me that we're never too old to make a difference. These past few years working with you, helping other people, have given me more joy than I thought possible." Margaret hugged Helen, both of them crying. "You saved me that night at the church," Margaret said, "and you've kept saving me all these years with your wisdom and friendship." "We saved each other," Helen replied. "That's what friends do." But not everything was peaceful moments. 9 years after the contract incident, the New Beginning Foundation faced its biggest challenge. An investigative report alleged that some of the foundation's funds were being mismanaged. The accusation was serious. A former employee from one of the state branches was claiming there were financial irregularities. The media latched onto the story, and suddenly years of work were under suspicion. Margaret was devastated. She had built everything so carefully, with such integrity. "It can't be true," she told Lily. "We have strict controls, regular audits." "I know, Margaret, but we need to investigate." Lily was calm, professional. "I'll hire independent auditors to review everything, every penny, every transaction." The following weeks were agony. Margaret barely slept, imagining everything she had built could collapse because of a scandal. The media was relentless, speculating about corruption and mismanagement. "I'm watching my reputation being destroyed," Margaret told Marion one evening. "Everything I worked to build." "The truth will come out," Marion said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. This will pass." But Margaret was less confident. She had seen how quickly public opinion could change, how people who once admired her now looked at her with suspicion. It was Richard who suggested she make a public statement. "Face this head-on," he said. "Don't hide. Speak directly to the people who trust you." Margaret organized a press conference. She was nervous when she entered the room full of journalists, cameras and microphones. But then she saw Helen in front, and Marion, and Lily, and Teresa, and Paul, and so many others she had helped, and she found her strength. "I understand there are concerns about the financial management of the New Beginning Foundation," she began, her voice steady. "And I want to say that I take these concerns very seriously. We hired independent auditors to review every aspect of our finances. We have nothing to hide because we've done nothing wrong." "But the former employee claims there are irregularities," a journalist asked. "And this person was fired precisely for trying to embezzle funds," Margaret Thompson replied. "When we discovered it, we took immediate action. We reported it to the authorities. This accusation is a revenge attempt by someone who was caught doing exactly what they're accusing us of doing." "Do you have proof of this?" "I do, and I will make all relevant documents available with approval from the competent authorities, so you can see for yourselves." The interview lasted an hour. Margaret answered every question with transparency and honesty. She didn't evade. She didn't hide behind corporate jargon. She spoke directly, as she always did. 2 weeks later, the independent auditors released their report. The New Beginning Foundation was impeccable. Not only were there no irregularities, but the foundation was a model of good financial management and transparency. More than that, the investigation revealed that the former employee who made the accusations had indeed tried to embezzle funds and, when caught, created false accusations as a way to get revenge. The media that had been so quick to attack now had to retract. Newspapers published glowing articles about Margaret's and the foundation's integrity, but the emotional damage was done. "I don't know if I can continue with this," Margaret admitted to Helen. "It was very painful to see my name dragged through the mud, to be accused of exactly the kind of thing I've always fought against." "But you were exonerated," Helen said gently, "and the people who matter never doubted you." "But what if it happens again? What if another dishonest employee tries something like this? Then you deal with it like you did this time, with honesty and transparency." Helen held Margaret's hand. "Margaret, people who do important things will always be targets. There will always be those who try to bring them down. But you can't let that stop you." Margaret knew Helen was right, and gradually she recovered from the trauma of the scandal. The foundation actually emerged stronger, with more donors, more public support. 10 years after that day that changed everything, Margaret was in a position she never imagined she'd be in. The New Beginning Foundation was active in all U.S. states and was beginning to expand to other Latin American countries. Her consulting firm was one of the most respected in the country, and she, personally, was recognized as one of the most influential women in the business and philanthropy sectors. But what made Margaret proudest wasn't the awards or recognition. It was the stories. Stories of people who had gone through the foundation and rebuilt their lives. Stories of companies she had saved from fraud. Stories of real changes in real lives. One of those stories was Claire's, a 61-year-old engineer who had been unemployed for 5 years. The New Beginning Foundation helped her retrain, and now she had her own renewable energy consulting firm. "I was ready to give up." Claire shared at a foundation event. "I thought I was too old, that the world no longer had a place for me. But the New Beginning Foundation showed me I still had so much to offer. Today, at 65, I'm at the peak of my career. It was for stories like this that Margaret continued. Even when she was tired, even when it was difficult, stories like Claire's reminded her why the work was important. It was around this time that Margaret received an unexpected invitation. The State University wanted to give her an honorary doctorate in recognition of her contributions to society. "It's a great honor," the president said when he made the invitation personally. "We rarely grant this honor, but your work, your story, your contribution to American society deserve this recognition." Margaret Thompson was speechless. An honorary doctorate from State University. She who had once been a university professor and lost everything. It was like a circle closing. The ceremony was emotional. Margaret was wearing the academic regalia, seated on stage with other laureates and distinguished professors. In the audience she saw everyone she loved. Helen, now 82 but still vibrant. Marion and Richard with Lily. Teresa, Paul, Andrea, Robert, Cynthia, and so many others who had been part of her journey. And there was also that woman from the park, the cleaner who had approached Margaret years ago. She now worked as a human resources manager at a mid-sized company, having gone through the foundation's mentorship program. When it was time for Margaret to receive her diploma and give her speech, she stepped up to the podium with a full heart. 16 years ago, she began. I was at this university as a professor. I had an office, students, publications. I felt important, accomplished, and then I lost everything. My marriage, my home, my career, and I ended up cleaning the same offices where I once taught. She paused, looking at the audience. At that time I thought it was the end, that my life was over, that I would never be someone of value again. But I was wrong. Those years of cleaning, those years of being invisible, taught me more about human worth than all my decades in academia. They taught me that dignity doesn't come from titles or positions. It comes from how we treat others, from our integrity, from our courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. There were tears in many eyes in the audience. This doctorate is a tremendous honor. But the real doctorate, the real learning, came from life. It came from everyday cleaning offices while maintaining my dignity. It came from having the courage to speak when no one wanted to listen. It came from falling and getting up, from losing everything and rebuilding, from being broken and emerging stronger. She raised the diploma. So I accept this not just for me, but for every person who has ever felt invisible. For every cleaner, every driver, every person in jobs that society considers lesser. You have value. You matter. And if someone like me can fall so low and still come back, then anyone can. The applause was deafening. People stood up, clapping, some crying openly. Margaret saw Helen wiping her face, Marion with a huge smile, Lily applauding enthusiastically. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Dozens of people approached Margaret, wanting to meet her, thank her, share their own stories of overcoming. It was there that she reconnected with Professor Anthony, her old mentor who had suggested years ago that she return to teaching. "I was wrong," he said simply. "When I suggested you go back to the university, you found something much more important. You found a way to truly change the world." "Thank you, Professor, that means a lot. You know, I always taught theory, abstract concepts," he continued. "But you're teaching something far more valuable. You're teaching by example, showing that it's possible to rise again, that worth doesn't come from position, but from character." Those words stayed with Margaret. She was teaching, yes, not in a classroom, but through her life, her actions, her choices. The following years brought more growth and changes. The New Beginning Foundation expanded to Argentina, Chile, and Colombia. Lily, now 30, was doing brilliant work as executive director. Margaret, at 70, finally began to truly slow down. It didn't stop completely, but she passed more responsibilities to the next generation of leaders she had mentored. It was a Sunday afternoon, during a family lunch at Marion and Richard's house, that something important happened. Everyone was there, Marion and Richard, Lily with her fiancée, Helen, Teresa, and several other close friends. "I want to make an announcement," Lily said, standing up. "Daniel and I are getting married, and more than that, we're pregnant." The table erupted in exclamations of joy. Marion cried. Richard hugged his daughter. Everyone congratulated the couple. But it was to Margaret that Lily turned next. "And Margaret, we want to ask you something. When the baby is born, we want you to be the godmother." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face. "It would be the greatest honor of my life." "You changed my life when I was 17, Lily said, also crying. "You taught me that one person can make a difference, no matter how young or insignificant they may seem. And now I want you to be part of my child's life, for him to grow up knowing the amazing woman you are." That night, Margaret was at home, reflecting on everything. A new generation was coming, a generation that would grow up in a world that, at least in small part, she had helped make better. A world where human value was more recognized, where second chances were possible, where being invisible didn't mean being unimportant. But then something happened that no one expected. Helen, who had been so vital, so present in everything, began to feel unwell. At first it was just small things, occasional forgetfulness, tiredness, but soon it became clear that something was wrong. The diagnosis was devastating. Early-stage Alzheimer's, but progressing rapidly. "How long?" Margaret asked the doctor, with Helen by her side. "It's hard to say. It could be years, it could be months. Every case is different." Helen took Margaret's hand. "Don't be sad," she said. "I've had a wonderful life, and these last few years, working with you, being your friend, have been the best of all." "You can't leave me," Margaret said, crying. "You're my family." "And I always will be," Helen smiled. "Even when I no longer remember your name, the love I feel for you will be here." She pointed to her heart. The following months were difficult. Margaret watched Helen, that wise and vibrant woman, slowly disappear. There were good days when she was lucid, and they talked as always. But there were more and more bad days, when Helen didn't recognize anyone, when she became confused and scared. Margaret visited every day. She read to Helen, held her hand, told stories. Even when Helen didn't respond, Margaret kept coming, a constant presence. "Why do you come every day?" one of the nurses asked. "She doesn't even recognize you most of the time." "Because she was there for me when I needed it most," Margaret replied simply. "Now it's my turn to be here for her." One autumn afternoon, Helen had a moment of clarity. She was in bed, Margaret by her side, when suddenly her eyes focused. "Margaret," she said clearly. "Helen, you're here." "I am. For now." Helen smiled weakly. "I don't know how much time I have, so I need to tell you something important." "Go ahead." "You saved me," Helen said. "When I met you in that church, I was lost, without purpose, without joy. But you gave me something to live for again. You made me feel useful, important. So thank you, my daughter. Thank you for letting me be part of your life." "Helen, And one more thing," Helen interrupted. "Don't stop when I'm gone. Keep up the work. Keep helping people. Because that's what you were born to do. I promise." Helen smiled and closed her eyes. It was the last lucid conversation they had. 2 weeks later, Helen passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was large. Helen had touched many lives during her 83 years, and people from all over came to pay their respects. But it was Margaret Thompson who gave the main eulogy. "Helen was wisdom personified," she began, struggling to keep her voice steady. She understood that life isn't about accumulating things or status. It's about the connections we make, the good we do, the lives we touch. She lived that every day. Margaret looked at the coffin. "Helen found me in my darkest moment, and with a few simple words, she gave me the strength to carry on. She taught me that it's never too late to make a difference, that age is just a number, that the value of a life is measured in love and kindness, not in years or achievements." After the funeral, Margaret spent weeks processing the loss. Helen had become so important, so central in her life. The absence was palpable, painful. It was Marian Anderson who helped her through this period. "Helen wouldn't want you to stop because of her," Marian said. "She would want you to continue, to honor her memory by doing the work you both loved." Marian was right. And gradually Margaret returned to work. But now there was an additional motivation. She was doing it not just for herself or the people she helped, but also for Helen, honoring her friend's memory through actions, not tears. Margaret created a scholarship in Helen's name, specifically for women over 65 who wanted to retrain or start new paths. "Helen believed we were never too old to start over," Margaret said when announcing the scholarship. "This is my way of ensuring that belief continues to help people." Lily Anderson's baby was born 6 months after Helen's passing. A beautiful girl with big, curious eyes. And when they asked Lily what the name would be, she replied without hesitation, "Helen Margaret, in honor of the 2 strongest women I know." Margaret held little Helen in her arms and cried, tears of sadness for the friend she lost, but also of joy for this new life, this new chance. The cycle continued. One life ended, another began, and the work of making the world better passed to the next generation. 12 years after that fateful day when she saw the Arabic contract, Margaret was 72. Her hair was completely white now, and she moved a little slower, but her mind was as sharp as ever, and her passion for the work hadn't diminished. The New Beginning Foundation was now operating in 8 countries and had helped more than 50,000 people rebuild their lives. It was a legacy Margaret was deeply proud of, but it was something that happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning that made Margaret realize the true impact of her work. She was at a cafe having her breakfast when a young woman approached. She must have been about 25, dressed professionally, holding an executive briefcase. "You're Margaret Thompson, aren't you?" "Yes, I am." I just wanted to thank you." The young woman had tears in her eyes. "You saved my mother, and by saving her you saved my whole family." "Your mother?" "Her name is Claire. She was an engineer, unemployed for years. Your foundation helped her 7 years ago. Today, she has a successful business. And more importantly, she regained her dignity, her confidence. I remember Claire. She's amazing." "Because of you," the young woman insisted. And you know what's most amazing? I decided to study social work because of your story. I want to help people like you helped my mother. I want to make a difference. After the young woman left, Margaret sat for a long time, processing. This was it. This was the true legacy. Not just the people she helped directly, but the generations that came after, inspired to also do good. That evening, Margaret was at home when she received a call from Lily. "Margaret, I need to tell you something, and I don't know how you'll react." "What happened?" "I received an offer. An international organization wants me to lead a global professional reintegration project. It would be based in Geneva. I would have to leave the foundation." Margaret felt a tightening in her heart, but she knew what she had to say. "You should accept." "Really? But the foundation—" "The foundation will be fine," Margaret said. "Lily, you've grown so much over these years. You're ready for bigger things, and this project can help people all over the world. It would be selfish of me to hold you back here." "But the foundation is your baby." "It was," Margaret gently corrected. "But now it's bigger than me. It has a life of its own. And there are other people capable of leading it. Paul is ready to take over as executive director. You know that. I'm going to miss you so much. And I will too, but I'm proud, Lily, so proud of what you've become." 6 months later, Lily and her family moved to Switzerland. It was hard to see the young woman Margaret had mentored for so long leave, but it was also rewarding to know that she was taking the values and lessons learned to a bigger stage. Paul took over as executive director of the New Beginning Foundation, and Margaret remained as board president, increasingly in an advisory role and less operational. "It's time," she told Marion. "Time to pass the baton to the next generation." "How do you feel about that?" "At peace," Margaret answered honestly. "I did what I needed to do. I built something that will last. Now it's time to let others continue the work." But Margaret didn't stop completely. She continued giving occasional lectures, doing specific consulting, mentoring young professionals. Her pace was slower, but her impact remained significant. It was during one of these lectures in a small town in rural Pennsylvania that something exciting happened. After her speech, a lady of about 80 years old approached. "My name is Angela," she said, "and I wanted to tell you a story." "Please tell me." 50 years ago, I was a cleaner at a large company in New York. One day I saw something wrong in the accounting books on the president's desk. I tried to warn them, but I was ignored, humiliated. I ended up giving up and never said anything again. Margaret listened attentively. 2 years later, the company went bankrupt because of exactly the problem I had seen. Hundreds of people lost their jobs, and I carried that guilt for decades. If I had insisted, if I had been braver— "You were brave," Margaret gently interrupted. "You spoke up. It's not your fault they didn't listen to you." "But I gave up." Angela had tears in her eyes. "And when I read your story, how you didn't give up, how you kept fighting even when no one believed in you, I finally understood. I understood that the problem wasn't with me. It was with a system that didn't value people like us." "Exactly. So thank you," Angela held Margaret's hands, "for giving me this peace even 50 years later, for showing me that I wasn't wrong to try. I was right, just no one was listening." That encounter stayed with Margaret. It made her realize that her story resonated not only with her generation, but with previous generations as well. All those women who had been ignored, silenced, undervalued. Her story gave voice to all of them. 13 years after the contract incident, Margaret was enjoying a quiet morning at home when Richard called. "Margaret, I need to tell you something important." "What is it?" "I've decided to sell Anderson Industries." Margaret was surprised. The company had been everything to Richard, his father's legacy. "Why?" "Because I realized something. The company was important to my father, and it was important to me. But it's not my passion. My true passion is the social work I started doing after everything that happened. I want to dedicate my time and resources to that." "Richard, that's incredible. And you're the reason. You showed me that success isn't measured in profits or market expansion. It's measured in impact, in the difference made in people's lives." I didn't do anything. You discovered that on your own. You did everything, Richard insisted. You saved me, Margaret. Not just my company, but my soul. You turned me into a better person. The sale of Anderson Industries was finalized a few months later. Richard used much of the money to create a new foundation focused on business education for underprivileged communities, and he asked Margaret to be the lead advisor. It's a full circle, Marion observed. You saved his company, and now he's using the resources from that company to do exactly the kind of work you do. It was true, and Margaret felt a deep satisfaction seeing how her courage that day, 13 years ago, had created ripples that kept expanding. Margaret was now 73. Her health was generally good, but she felt the weight of the years. Her back hurt more, her hands trembled sometimes, she tired more easily. But her mind was sharp, and her heart still beat strongly for the work she loved. It was on a winter afternoon that Margaret finally decided to write a second book. Not an autobiography like the first, but a book of reflections on aging, value, and purpose. I want it to be for older people, she explained to Marion, for those who feel life is over, that they have nothing left to contribute. I want to show that the best years may still be ahead. She spent months writing, pouring decades of wisdom and experience onto the page. She wrote about loss and rebuilding, about dignity and worth, about courage and persistence. The book was published on the 14th anniversary of the contract incident. It was called It's Never Too Late, Finding Purpose in the Second Half of Life, and quickly became a success among older readers. Margaret received thousands of letters and emails from people in their 60s, 70s, 80s who said the book changed their perspective, gave them hope, showed them there was still time to make a difference. One such letter came from an 82-year-old woman who started an animal shelter after reading the book, another from a 75-year-old man who returned to painting after decades, another from a 71-year-old lady who finally found the courage to leave an abusive marriage and start over. You're giving people permission to live, Marion said, to not just exist, but to truly live, regardless of age. It was a beautiful legacy, and Margaret felt grateful to be able to contribute in this way. But life, as always, had more twists in store. On a sunny spring morning, while Margaret was in her apartment, she received an unexpected call. It was from the hospital. Teresa, her former supervisor and now dear friend, had had a stroke. Margaret rushed to the hospital. Teresa was in the ICU, connected to various machines. She was conscious but partially paralyzed on her right side. "Oh, Teresa," Margaret held her hand. "Margaret," Teresa spoke with difficulty. "What a thing, huh? You never know when it's your time. Don't talk like that. You'll get better." "Maybe, maybe not," Teresa smiled weakly. "But if it is my time, I want you to know I feel fulfilled. These last years working at your firm, making a difference, were the best of my life." "You're not going anywhere," Margaret insisted, tears in her eyes. But Teresa was right to be realistic. Her body was tired, her 75 years taking their toll. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital before finally passing away, surrounded by people she loved. It was the second major loss Margaret had suffered. First Helen, now Teresa. The women who had been so important in her journey were leaving, one by one. Teresa's funeral was filled with current and former employees of Anderson Industries. Everyone had stories to tell about how Teresa had helped, supported, and mentored them over the years. She was tough. Cynthia, now 35 and a manager at a large company, said during the wake, "But she was fair, and she genuinely cared about each of us." Margaret agreed. Teresa had been tough with her too, that day years ago, when she tried to make her give up on warning Richard. But all of that led to something bigger, something transformative. After the funeral, Margaret was emotionally and physically exhausted. Marion took her home and insisted on staying with her. "You shouldn't be alone right now," Marion said. "I'm fine." "No, you're not. And it's okay not to be okay." Marion made tea for both of them. "You've lost 2 dear friends in just a few years. It's normal to feel the weight of that." I feel like my time is running out too," Margaret admitted. "And I wonder if I've done enough." "Margaret, you've transformed thousands of lives. You changed an entire corporate culture. You created institutions that will keep helping people for generations. Marion took her hand. You've done more than enough. You've done the extraordinary. Those words brought some comfort, and in the days that followed, Margaret began to process her losses in a healthier way. She cried, yes, but she also celebrated the lives that Helen and Teresa had lived. She celebrated the impact they had made. 15 years after the day that changed everything, Margaret was 74. The New Beginning Foundation was stronger than ever, now operating in 15 countries, and having helped over 100,000 people. Paul was doing exceptional work as executive director. The consulting firm Margaret had founded continued to thrive under new leadership, and the mentorship program for older professionals had become an international benchmark. It was around this time that Margaret received the news that she would be honored by the US government for her contributions to society. The ceremony would be at the White House, with the president in attendance. "I can't believe this," Margaret said to Marion. "Me, a former cleaning lady, receiving a medal from the president." "You're not a former cleaning lady," Marion corrected. "You're a leader, a visionary, someone who changed the country for the better. The fact that you were a cleaning lady is just part of your journey." The ceremony was grand. Margaret was nervous but also deeply honored. When the president placed the medal around her neck and spoke about her achievements, she thought about everything she had been through to get there. She thought about that night 15 years ago, when she saw the Arabic contract and decided not to stay silent. She thought about Richard humiliating her, about losing her job, about feeling completely hopeless. She thought about Helen in the church, giving her strength to carry on. About Lily believing in her. About Marion finally listening. About Richard asking for forgiveness. She thought about every person she had helped, every life she had touched, every change she had inspired. And she realized it had all been worth it. Every tear, every moment of pain, every instant of despair. Because all of it had led to this moment, to this place, to this legacy. In her speech after receiving the medal, Margaret spoke from the heart. "This medal isn't just mine. This is for everyone who has ever been invisible, who has been ignored, who has been considered worthless because of their job or position in life. It's for every cleaner, every driver, every person in jobs that society deems lesser. You are seen, you matter, and your voices deserve to be heard." The entire hall rose in applause, and Margaret Thompson knew in that moment that her mission was accomplished. Not because it was over, the work would never end, but because she had planted seeds that would keep growing long after her. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Margaret was talking with several dignitaries when a young cleaning staff member approached timidly. "Sorry to interrupt," the young woman said, "but I just wanted to say that your story inspired me. I also study at night. I'm in college for business administration, and one day I want to make a difference like you did." Margaret hugged the young woman. "You're already making a difference," she said. "By studying, by striving, by not giving up. You're already an inspiration." In the following months, Margaret's life continued at a calmer pace. She had stepped back almost completely from the daily operations of the foundation and the firm, keeping only an advisory role. She spent more time with family and friends. She often visited Marion and Richard, played with little Helen, now 5 years old, and full of questions about the world. "Grandma Margaret," the girl asked one day, "is it true that you used to clean floors?" "Yes, it's true." "And now you're important?" Margaret smiled. "I've always been important, sweetheart. Just as every person is important, no matter what they do. It took me a long time to understand that, but it's true." "I think you're the most important person in the world," little Helen said, hugging Margaret. That hug was worth more than any medal or recognition. On a quiet evening, Margaret was on her porch, looking at the stars, when her phone rang. It was Lily, calling from Switzerland. "Margaret, I have amazing news. Tell me." "The project I'm leading was such a success that we're expanding globally, and we're using the New Beginning Foundation model as the basis. Your work is going to influence professional reintegration policies all over the world." Margaret felt tears in her eyes. "Lily, I have no words. It's you. It's what you built. You're changing the world, Margaret. Literally. After hanging up, Margaret sat for a long time, absorbing the news. Her work, which had started with a simple act of courage 15 years ago, was now influencing global policies. It was more than she had ever dreamed. And all because she didn't stay silent that day. Because she had the courage to speak, even when no one wanted to listen. Margaret was now 75 years old. She knew she didn't have decades ahead of her, but looking back, she saw a life well lived. A life that had had dramatic falls, yes, but also extraordinary highs. She had been a teacher, a cleaner, a consultant, a founder, an author, a mentor. She had been a wife, a friend, a godmother. She had been broken and rebuilt. She had been invisible and then seen. And through it all, she had kept her integrity, her compassion, her commitment to doing what's right. On a Saturday afternoon, Richard organized a special dinner. He gathered everyone who had been part of Margaret's journey. Paul, Andrea, Robert, Cynthia, all now successful in their own careers. Little Helen, Marion, even that former young waiter, now a respected lawyer. "I want to make a toast," Richard said, raising his glass, "to Margaret, the woman who saved my company, my family, and taught me the true meaning of human worth." "To Margaret," everyone repeated. "You all honor me too much," Margaret said, moved. "But the truth is, you all saved me just as much as I saved any of you. Each person here taught me something important, helped me grow to become who I am today. You gave us second chances," Paul said, "when no one else believed in us." "Because I needed a second chance too," Margaret Thompson replied, "and someone eventually gave me one, so I just passed on what I received." "But you started the chain," Marion insisted. "You were the first to have the courage to challenge the system, to insist that everyone has value, and you inspired all of us to do the same." It was true. And looking around the table, seeing all those people who had thrived, who were now helping others, Margaret felt a deep satisfaction. This was her true legacy, not the awards or recognitions, but the people. The changed lives, the chains of kindness started, the seeds of hope planted. That night when Margaret arrived home, she sat in her favorite armchair and reflected on her life. She thought about all the highs and lows, about Richard and the failed marriage, the years of cleaning, that fateful day with the Arabic contract, about Richard, Marion, Lily, Helen, Teresa, and so many others who had marked her journey. And she realized something important. She wouldn't change a thing, not even the painful parts, because everything, absolutely everything, had been necessary to bring her here. The falls had made her stronger, the invisibility had made her more empathetic, the humiliation had made her more humble, and the rebuilding had made her wiser. Margaret picked up a notebook and began to write, not to publish but for herself, a final reflection on everything she had learned. "Life isn't linear," she wrote. "It's not a straight line from success to failure and vice versa. It's a constant cycle of ups and downs, of gains and losses, of building and rebuilding. What matters isn't avoiding the falls, but how we get up after them. What matters isn't never failing, but having the courage to try again. What matters isn't being perfect, but being authentic. And most of all, what matters isn't the position we hold or the money we have, but the good we do and the lives we touch." She continued writing for hours, pouring decades of wisdom onto the paper. When she finally stopped, it was already dawn, but she felt at peace, complete. The next day, Sunday, Margaret woke up early. She made her coffee, sat on the porch and watched the sunrise, the city slowly coming to life, people starting their routines, the world continuing its eternal cycle. Her phone rang. It was the building's front desk. "Ms. Thompson, there's a young woman here who wants to speak with you. She says it's urgent." "Send her up." Minutes later, a young woman of about 20 was at the door. She looked nervous, holding a worn-out backpack. "Are you Margaret Thompson?" "Yes, I am. Please come in." The young woman entered hesitantly. "My name is Julie. I read your book, and I'm going through something similar to what you went through. I lost my job, my home, everything. I'm cleaning houses to survive, and I feel invisible, worthless." Margaret recognized that look. It was the same one she had had years ago. "Sit here, Julie, let's talk." And so, the cycle continued. A new person in need, a new chance to make a difference, a new opportunity to show that falls aren't final, that value doesn't depend on position, that there's always hope. Margaret spent the next few hours talking with Julie, listening to her story, offering advice, connecting her with resources that could help. And when Julie finally left, there was hope in her eyes, where before there was only despair. "Thank you," Julie said at the door, "for seeing me, for hearing me, for making me feel like I still have value." "You always had value," Margaret replied. "You just needed someone to remind you of that." After Julie left, Margaret Thompson stood at the door for a moment. Then she smiled. The work would never end. There would always be more people needing help, more stories of hope to be written. And that was good, because it meant she still had purpose, still had something to contribute. At 75 years old, Margaret Thompson was no longer that invisible cleaning lady. But she wasn't just a successful consultant or founder of an influential organization either. She was something more important. She was a bridge between despair and hope, between invisibility and recognition, between downfall and rebuilding. And as long as she had strength, as long as she had life, she would continue being that bridge. For Julie, for all the Julies yet to come, for everyone who needed someone to believe in them when no one else did. Because in the end, that's what mattered, not the awards or recognition, not the medals or titles, but the human connections, the good deeds, the lives touched. Margaret returned to her balcony and sat down, watching the city. She thought about everything she had lived through, about everyone she had met, about everything she had built, and she felt deeply grateful. Grateful for the downfall that had made her stronger. Grateful for the people who had helped her when she was at rock bottom. Grateful for the opportunity to turn pain into purpose. Most importantly, grateful for having had the courage that day, 15 years ago, to not stay silent, to insist on doing what was right, even when everyone was against her. Because it was that decision, that moment of courage, that changed everything. Not just for her, but for thousands of people around the world. And the legacy would continue, through the New Beginning Foundation, through the books she wrote, through the people she mentored, through every life she touched. The sun was high now, bathing the city in golden light. A new day, new possibilities, new chances to make a difference. And Margaret, at 75 years old, was still ready. Ready for whatever came next. Ready to keep helping, serving, making a difference, because this was her purpose. Not just now, but always. She just needed to fall, lose everything, and rise again to finally understand it. And now that she understood, nothing would stop her. Not age, not tiredness, not the challenges that would surely still come. She would continue. Because that's what people with purpose do. They continue. Always. End of story. And you? What did you think of Margaret's inspiring journey? Tell us in the comments what moved you most in this story. Leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one. Your participation is very important to us.